Cyan often reflected on his father's stern advice, dedicating one's life to upholding the honor of the family name. His father had always intended for Cyan to desire nothing more than to attend to his older brother, Echelle, like a loyal shadow. This principle had guided Cyan's actions and decisions throughout his life, shaping his sense of duty and loyalty. However, the present situation was dire. Cyan found himself slumped on the ground, surrounded by the formidable Knights of Light. He pondered internally that it had indeed come to this point, a culmination of tensions and unresolved conflicts. Amidst the tension, one man stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. He remarked that witnessing such an extraordinary sight was priceless. A lone knight holding his own against the fiercest warrior of the continent was truly a marvel. The man continued, recognizing Cyan as his lord's younger brother, and called out his name, Lord Cyan Vert. Cyan responded with the name Boris. Despite being a member of the Order of Light, Boris bore a foul grin, his demeanor unsettling in the current moment. Summoning his crimson-purple dagger from the shadows, Cyan held it firmly despite his tattered body and the blood that oozed from his internal injuries. His presence was menacing, a stark contrast to the order he was part of. Cyan questioned whether the Emperor had ordered Boris's actions, his mind racing to understand the motives behind this betrayal. Boris feigned surprise, covering his mouth as if he had been unaware of the sinister rumors surrounding the vile black mist. Cyan's suspicions deepened, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. In that instant, Cyan rose to his feet, releasing a black aura that emanated from him, sharp and threatening to anyone who dared approach. Boris seized the opportunity to accuse Cyan of being an assassin belonging to the mist, a fog that cast a pall over the Order of Light. He declared his intention to report Cyan as a heretical rebel, his voice dripping with disdain. Cyan responded with a stern warning, threatening Boris with severe consequences. The tension between them escalated as Boris announced that escaping using a secret technique was impossible, revealing that he had cast a level 9 star magic barrier. Cyan's determination solidified. He knew he had to find a way to inform his brother and uncover who was truly behind these events. He declared his intent to raise everything, to destroy Boris and whatever plans he had in motion. Suddenly, a single word from Echelle carried more meaning than simple statements, causing Cyan to freeze in place as he realized the voice's origin. Memories of his father's advice echoed in Cyan's mind, dedicating his life to the family's honor and recognizing Echelle's success as his own. Yet, Echelle stood before him now, shrouded in mystery and accusation. Cyan understood that Echelle was the one orchestrating these events. His dark energy dispersed, and he fell to the ground, feeling defeated. Echelle expressed that Cyan's eyes revealed his lack of understanding regarding the situation. Cyan muttered in confusion, trying to grasp the gravity of Echelle's words. Echelle praised him for performing his duties well, for the family name, the people, and himself. Shock overwhelmed Cyan as Echelle revealed that he had shouldered the weight of their duty for decades and was now there to lift that burden from Cyan's shoulders. Cyan questioned if he had done something wrong, his hand clutching the dagger tightly. Echelle accused him of becoming a vile murderer under the influence of the sinister fog, deceiving everyone and committing heinous sins. Cyan grappled with these accusations, gritting his teeth at Echelle's harsh words. He thought about the numerous conflicts they had faced together. The feud over the imperial crown, the suppression of the demon army, the war for the unification of the continent, and how he had assisted Echelle in succeeding in all their endeavors. Dedicating his life to Echelle had also been for his own good, but now it seemed he was being cast aside without reason. Determined to confront the betrayal, Cyan mustered his dark energy, blood flowing from his wounds, and vowed to destroy Echelle. His aura radiated outward, filling the canyon with an oppressive darkness. A knight exclaimed that Cyan's magic was beyond human, recognizing the immense power he wielded. Undeterred, Cyan provoked Echelle, questioning how a supposed great hero could fear his own younger brother. Echelle, visibly angered, remained silent as Cyan approached with assassin-like speed. Cyan delivered 2 swift strikes, but Echelle effortlessly blocked them with his sword, the clanging of their weapons echoing through the canyon. Moving with calculated precision, Cyan circled around, believing that a single hit to a vital point would end the confrontation. He launched another attack, but Echelle remained unfazed, his composure unbroken. The clash continued, with Cyan's shadow energy intertwining with Boris's light power as it defended Echelle from behind. He marveled at Cyan's formidable magic, unable to comprehend its extent. Echelle dismissed his brother as a poor fool, swiftly stabbing Cyan in the abdomen and causing him to lose grip of his dagger. Echelle expressed regret, hoping for a peaceful resolution, as Cyan reverted back in surprise, losing his power and his grip on reality. Echelle kicked Cyan away effortlessly, treating him like worthless trash. Cyan watched helplessly as his brother walked away, his breath shallow and labored. He reflected on his seemingly foolish life as his eyes began to close. Summoning his last ounce of strength, Cyan dashed toward Echelle, his dagger inches from Echelle's neck. Echelle swiftly swung his sword, releasing a surge of light power to finish Cyan once and for all. A voice called out to Cyan from his dark consciousness, jolting him awake. He gasped for air, sweat dripping profusely as he realized his neck was intact. Looking up, he saw a maid screaming at him to get ready. Emily stood before him, surprising Cyan. It had been nearly 20 years since he had seen her, and she hadn't changed a bit. Recognizing his room and the childhood furniture, Cyan realized he had somehow become a young boy again. The room around him was familiar, triggering memories that felt both distant and immediate. Emily called out to him once more, mentioning a sparring match. Confused, Cyan recalled being back at the castle of the House of Duke Vert. He saw himself in proper attire, holding a sword, standing in an arena watched by an eager crowd. Memories flooded back to March 1st, 985 since creation, a day before he was to enter the academy. He remembered the sparring matches, the importance of the event observed personally by his father, Duke Vert. His opponent had been Cyan Vert, his half-brother, who received more attention despite Cyan being the youngest of 4 sons. As an illegitimate child, Cyan's humiliation in the match had made him a laughingstock among his peers. His father's harsh words after losing the match had marked the end of his father's interest in him, deepening his sense of isolation. Emily approached him, suggesting he forfeit the match, but Cyan insisted he would win. Feeling hopeless, as even his maid thought so, Cyan drew his rapier, feeling its weight. He realized this was not a dream or an illusion and questioned if he had truly gone back to his past. The gravity of the situation settled in as he faced Cyan, who was amused by Cyan's unexpected presence. Ignoring the provocation, Cyan awaited the command to begin. Cyan lunged with his sword, insulting Cyan as a half-wit. Cyan observed Cyan's slow movements and swiftly shifted his leg, causing Cyan's strike to miss and clang against the ground. Cyan accused Cyan of dodging like a coward, but Cyan swiftly disarmed him, kicking his leg and causing Cyan to tumble to the ground in pain. Margaret cried over her son's injury, while Duke Vert watched in surprise at Cyan's effortless movements. Cyan contemplated ending the match by pointing his blade at Cyan's throat, but decided instead to defeat him decisively to prevent future harassment. Possessing nearly 40 years of experience in a 10-year-old body, Cyan was determined to live for himself. He kicked Cyan to the ground, securing a crushing defeat that left a lasting impression on his father. Cyan had suffered a crushing defeat in the sparring match, prompting the Duke to postpone his previously planned journey in order to meet with his son. The performance in the match must have left quite an impression. Cyan walked through the hall toward his father's office, his thoughts occupied by the unexpected turn of events. Even the Duke's personal high knight and bodyguard, Jerkin, had been assigned to escort him. A slight turn of the head acknowledged the knight's presence. Along the way, Margaret appeared in the hallway. She had likely just come from the infirmary because of her son. A quiet amusement flickered in Cyan's mind. Her expression was one of barely contained fury. A grin formed as he addressed her, feigning concern for Cyan's well-being. Margaret's scowl deepened as she responded with seething contempt. The audacity to ask such a thing after what had been done to his own brother was beyond brazen. With an air of indifference, Cyan dismissed the accusation, stating that it had merely been a sparring match. Without waiting for further protest, he moved to walk past her. Margaret, however, refused to let the moment pass unchallenged. A sneer accompanied her words as she declared the folly of associating with those beneath one's station. The provocation did not stop there. A remark about his lineage, laced with venom, followed, one that crossed an unforgivable line. A sharp halt signaled that Cyan had stopped in his tracks. The words reverberated in his mind. Killing intent surged, dark and immediate. She had overstepped. Should she die for it? Yet, just as quickly, the dangerous impulse subsided. Instead, a grin formed once more. There existed a far more satisfying way to make her suffer. One that would unfold gradually, ensuring that misery clung to her at every step. With an almost casual tone, he shifted the conversation. A reminder was issued. Krantz would be entering the academy alongside him. Margaret's response held a note of unease as she demanded to know his intent. The smirk remained. Surely, she wanted Krantz to graduate with all his limbs intact. The provocation was returned tenfold. Margaret's patience snapped. The vile words spoken with such insolence were intolerable. Anger propelled her hand forward, intent on delivering a slap. Jurken's presence, however, disrupted the motion. Without hesitation, the knight stepped between them. With unwavering composure, he addressed the Duchess, offering a respectful yet firm reminder that the Duke was waiting. The matter could not be delayed further. With a final, formal dismissal, Jurken ensured that the conversation had reached its end. Margaret fumed, but no further protest could be made. The Duke's orders were absolute. A quiet snicker escaped as the realization settled. The protection of a knight who answered only to the Duke held undeniable value. Even the Duchess held no sway over him. Before long, Cyan stood before his father. A formal greeting was issued. The youngest of the house of Vert stood in the presence of the Duke. A simple command followed. The Duke instructed him to sit. 15 years had passed since a conversation in private had last taken place. Duke Williers Vert, the great lord of Valias, ruler of the western territory of the Wusif Empire. The guardian of the continent. The great hero, whose powerful magic and strategic mind had halted the advance of the demons. A man who had taken on a duty no one had asked him to bear. Even until the moment of his death during the Demon King's invasion, his only wish had been peace for the continent. Yet, the memories of him were somewhat different. He had chosen a life of service to others, a life that, in the end, made him nothing more than a fool. As Cyan took his seat, that thought lingered. A past life had already provided its judgment. Williers, Cyan's father, expressed admiration for Cyan's swordsmanship, noting how Cyan had dodged a sword with precise anticipation. Cyan felt a moment of confusion in response. Williers clarified his observation, explaining that when Krantz had lunged at Cyan, he had seen the trajectory of Krantz's rapier and had turned just enough to evade it. Curious, Williers inquired when he had learned such swordsmanship. Nervously, Cyan responded that he hadn't received formal training, but had trained by himself every night. Internally, he marveled at his father's perceptiveness. Williers exclaimed that the Cyan he knew had no aptitude or interest in swordsmanship and questioned how Cyan had managed to conceal such talent. Cyan admitted that he had simply avoided drawing attention to himself, scratching his head in response. Williers acknowledged Cyan's masterful maneuver against Krantz, despite his desire for privacy. Williers then questioned whether Cyan thought his subsequent actions were excessive, referring to how Cyan had repeatedly kicked Krantz down instead of securing a quick victory with a simple sword point to Krantz's neck. Deep in thought, Cyan considered whether his father was attempting to judge his character. He admitted his desire to prove himself. Williers sought clarification on what Cyan meant by proving himself. Cyan explained that although they might be half-brothers, he believed he was superior to Krantz and had concluded that this was the true purpose of their sparring matches. Surprised, Cyan watched as his father chuckled at his answer. Williers expressed delight at Cyan's sharp and straightforward response, stating how overjoyed he was to see such talent in his son. He added that Cyan would be of great assistance to Echelle someday. Cyan was taken aback, his mind filled with horror at the mention of Echelle. He recalled how his older brother had stabbed him, the very person who had betrayed him despite their shared dedication to Echelle. Cyan realized that nothing had changed. His father was still obsessed with Echelle. Although still a child, Cyan remained silent, clenching his fist in frustration. Williers offered to give Cyan something for winning the match, suggesting that the term prize might not be quite right, and asked what Cyan would like. Stealing his conviction, Cyan declared that if that was how it was going to be, he would destroy everything that Echelle set out to do. He then expressed his desire to go to the front lines. Back in his room, Emily screamed in shock at Cyan's decision to go to the front lines. Cyan revealed that he had informed his father, but nothing had been decided yet. Emily responded angrily. accusing him of going insane and questioning his understanding of the dangers that awaited. She cried in horror, recalling conversations with maids that described the front lines as crawling with hideous, evil demon beasts. Cyan explained that their territory was Velius, the westernmost region of the Wusif Empire, the only area referred to as the front lines. The foremost area was Lamea Valley, where the centuries-long war against the demons continued to rage. He revealed that his father had been vehemently against his going there, but had eventually consented on the condition that he become qualified to go to Lamea Valley within a month. Looking at his palm, Cyan thought about not yet knowing what the qualification entailed. He clenched his fist, steeling his resolve, and decided that the first step would be to build as much muscle as possible, as he was still much weaker compared to his peers. Recalling the fight against Krantz, Cyan felt fortunate that he still possessed his battle instincts from his previous life. A dark crimson aura emanated from his hand as he sensed a bit of magic within his body. He believed he could make good use of that magic if he trained his body and decided to start training immediately. Suddenly, the door to his room was forcefully opened, and a soft, clear voice called out his name. Cyan saw Alice, with a pair of sky-blue eyes and straight hair with a braid on the side of her head, who appeared angry for some reason. Alice abruptly grabbed Cyan's collar and shook his thin, fragile body. Emily greeted Alice, hoping she had been well. Alice screamed at Cyan, questioning whether he had really told their father that he wanted to go to the front lines. Cyan pleaded with his sister to let him go first. Alice expressed that Cyan must think of himself as a real warrior just because he had beaten Krantz in a sparring match and demanded she wouldn't allow him to go to the front lines. She ordered him to the rooftop, but Cyan knew she was merely concerned about him and wanted to demonstrate how harsh the front line was. Cyan had no choice but to concede. With his rapier tied to his waist, he stood before Alice, who had her own long sword ready. She declared that the moment their swords were drawn, if Cyan could withstand her attacks for 3 minutes, she would allow him to go to the front lines. Wearing a weary expression, Cyan questioned whether this was truly necessary. Alice dismissed his question, instead asking whether he was interested in carrying on the family name. Cyan thought to himself that this was the real issue and had zero interest in it. Alice took Cyan's silence as affirmation. Cyan drew his rapier, his face down, thinking to himself that sparring with Krantz had already made the day quite eventful. With light steps, Alice lunged with her sword drawn, attempting an attack. Cyan was surprised by her speed, but effortlessly blocked her strike. Alice was bewildered, wondering how a 10-year-old could block it. Cyan pondered whether Alice was truly not going to hold back against a brother 7 years younger than her. Alice abruptly jumped back, and a skidding sound echoed as her legs slipped on the floor. She marveled in shock at how he had parried her long sword with his thin rapier, her hand quivering as she realized the possibility of it being just a fluke. Her killing intent surged, and she remarked that Cyan was better than she had expected. Horror descended upon Cyan as he saw the seriousness in his sister's demeanor. He thought to himself that he was in trouble and tried to plead with Alice. A fierce exchange of sword strikes followed, accompanied by the repeated clanging of metal. Cyan, with his frail, thin body, blocked every strike from his 17-year-old sister's barrage of attacks. Alice jumped up, her arms stretched back, preparing for a heavy downward sword strike. Cyan raised his rapier, meeting the blade head-on. He then tilted his rapier slightly as it ran along her blade. Having lived as an assassin his entire life, Cyan's instincts took over. Entering the battle, his instinct was to take a life. His sword moved straight toward Alice's neck, but she failed to respond. At that moment, Cyan executed a technique to twist his sword, redirecting his attack towards Alice. Alice was very surprised, but she didn't hesitate. She swiftly knocked aside Cyan's sword and stepped back. Cyan also retreated, thinking it could have been disastrous had he not twisted his sword midway. He realized that without doing so, he would have killed her. Cyan's swordsmanship skills were primarily designed for lethal combat, making it immediately difficult to fight without intending to kill, especially since his strength was lacking. He wondered how much time remained of the 3 minutes. To compensate for his weak strength, he imbued his sword with mana, but he was almost at his limit. In anger, Alice began to chant a spell to enhance her sword's power. Earth and wind responded, merging with her sword. Cyan was surprised and afraid of her 6-star magic. Alice's entire sword was now enveloped in mana from multiple elements. Cyan feared she was trying to kill him and realized it was over, noticing the determined look in her eyes. Alice seemed to have lost her will to dominate a child, repeating in her mind that she couldn't lose. Fearful, Cyan thought he would fall out of the castle even if he tried to block her attack. He just had to trust that this would work. After carefully considering, Cyan rushed towards Alice. Alice stood before him, gathering mana into her sword, causing it to soar high into the sky. Cyan prayed silently for Jurkin to come out. Just as Alice's dangerously large sword was about to reach Cyan, the knight of the family appeared, demanding to stop everything. He deflected Alice's attack with his sword and lifted Cyan with his other hand. The force of the collision lit up the night sky. With a serious expression, he warned Miss Alice that she was being too harsh against a much younger opponent. Cyan sighed in relief, thinking he had been wondering when the knight would appear. Alice immediately sobered up, hugged Cyan, and apologized, explaining that she must have lost her mind for a second there. She added that she had just wanted to stop him from going to the battlefield and had become too obsessed with it. Cyan thought cheerfully that this was very like her. She always tried so hard with everything. He added that his sister was the elite of the elites, having achieved an S in all subjects at the Royal Academy, where all the talented children gathered, whether they were skilled in swordsmanship, magic, or other fields of study. On top of her astounding beauty, people called Alice God's child. From a young age, she was trained in swordsmanship and was recognized as the future guardian of the continent alongside the eldest son, Echelle. However, not long after joining the Knights of Light, she was killed. Cyan thought to himself that he missed Alice and vowed to protect her this time. Alice turned to him and remarked that now that she thought about it, he was the Duke's guardian knight, but the Duke had just left for the war. Jurkin responded that he was carrying out the Duke's orders to protect the young master for a while, adding that he couldn't reveal this because he was supposed to carry it out in secret. Cyan reflected that he had felt Jurkin's presence ever since leaving the Duke's office and wondered why his father had instructed Jurkin to act secretly, thinking that if Jurkin had continued to ignore him, he would not have shown himself. Sensing her baby brother's feelings, Alice smiled happily, noting that he was still like a little kid to her. The next day, Alice returned to the academy. Apparently, Alice had returned briefly to see their father before her graduation. During this time, Cyan was struggling to push beyond his limits by attempting to perform push-ups, managing only 10 before trembling. He needed to become stronger, so he had been focusing on strength training for the past 2 weeks, but 10 push-ups remained his limit. For the past 2 weeks, he had been hitting a wall, despite being pretty confident in his strength. Now, he desired to return to his former strength and needed a solution. Emily entered the room and announced that a package had arrived from Miss Alice. Cyan confirmed with joy at the news, but Emily, with a disgusted and pinched expression, questioned the contents, noting the foul smell. She realized it was Hellhound's blood that Alice had requested. It was a rare item found only in Lamea Valley, but the rumors of its presence in the black market were true. The blood of demonic beasts was considered poisonous due to its sickening smell and the burning sensation upon consumption. However, it actually permanently increased the mana and strength of the person who consumed it. Most people believed it was just a false rumor, but Cyan knew it was true from his past life experience. Emily asked the young master if he was really going to drink that. Cyan replied with a smile that he was the only person able to adapt to her cooking skills. He reminisced about the first time, which was mushroom soup, and a smirk played on his lips as he thought his heart had stopped for a moment after a single bite of that thing compared to the Hellhound's blood. It was nothing. After finishing the Hellhound's blood, he slammed the container down on the table and shouted loudly that it was good. He then called for Emily, who responded that she was going to go for a walk. Cyan announced that he would return to see if it worked. Walking through the forest, Cyan thought it had been a while since he had come here and that he had been waiting for this day for the last 2 weeks. The moment when Jurkin was not around for his regular reports, as he kept following Cyan around, which was annoying since Cyan often came to this place when he wanted to be alone. He recalled that one day, Echelle had received a divine revelation from the god of light, Lumendal, which stated that an ancient temple was hidden somewhere in these mountains. Although Cyan hadn't fully believed it, he realized that there was indeed a place where the flow of mana was concentrated. Since the divine revelation had yet to arrive, it seemed that Cyan was the only one who knew about this at the moment. Pressing his hand down on the ground, Cyan used mana to give out a sense of presence, causing the surrounding area to collapse. He laughed joyfully, thinking of Echelle, and mused that she couldn't even imagine what he was doing at that moment. Looking down, he saw a staircase descending into the ground with a light at the end. It seemed like the temple was nearby, and with determination, Cyan decided to enter. He noted that it was different from the last time he had been here, muttering to himself as he took in his surroundings. The place was an ancient temple that had once served the god of light, Lumendal, until all history on this land was erased due to the god-demon war that had happened 300 years ago. Who could have imagined such a place hidden in the mountains just behind the castle? Cyan observed it now, the remnants of a temple whose origins seemed rooted in the distant year 999 before creation. On August 12th of that year, humanity had achieved a monumental victory, driving out the Demon King's army from Velius. Despite being far weaker, humans had unearthed ancient relics, artifacts known as the weapons of the gods, that had tipped the scales in their favor. Among these relics was Duran Dark, a holy sword blessed by Lumendal, the god of light. This weapon had been heralded as the key to humanity's triumph over the demons. Cyan's future, however, held a bitter irony, as it was destined to bring about his demise, wielded by Echelle Vert. Perhaps this very sword had a role in Cyan's inexplicable regression. Reaching out, he touched the holy blade, its surface smooth and unyielding. As expected, there was no response. The absence of any reaction soured his mood, stirring a fleeting annoyance. It seemed the sword held no interest in him, and he dismissed it, silently vowing to focus on the task at hand. Continuing past the light of the altar, his attention was drawn to a shadow lurking nearby. Its presence felt otherworldly, impossible to ignore. At first glance, one might mistake it for the sword shadow, but its origin was far more complex. Light and darkness coexisted, and the shadow concealed a hidden pathway beneath the altar. Descending the newly revealed staircase, Cyan encountered a door shrouded in mystery. He opened it cautiously and stepped inside. Before him stood a sword bathed in a bloody red aura. It radiated immense magical power, distorting the air around it. Cyan's expression twisted into one of joy as he reached for it. This was Kieram, his magic sword. Addressing the weapon, he acknowledged its dormant state, his voice calm, yet edged with anticipation. The silence was broken by a grotesque voice emanating from the blade, mocking him for his lack of fear and questioning his audacity in awakening it. Darkness surged forward, aiming to engulf him entirely. Unfazed, Cyan caught the encroaching shadow with one hand, halting its advance. The darkness shifted form, coalescing into the shape of a woman. Her attempt to retreat was futile as Cyan's gaze locked onto her. His smile brimmed with a chilling intensity. She demanded to know how he had touched her. Disbelief etched into her face. Cyan dismissed her questions, calmly asserting his claim over the sword. She spat in defiance, lunging at him with her claws, only for him to evade her attack effortlessly. As the battle unfolded, her disbelief grew. She demanded answers, sensing the unmistakable presence of Aer's aura surrounding him. Cyan confirmed her suspicions, declaring himself the successor of Aer and commanding her submission. The demonic sword, now furious, launched a ferocious assault, her attacks growing faster and more relentless. Cyan's thoughts remained steady, calculating. Words had proven futile, and he knew Kieram's ultimate goal was to claim his body. Deciding to assert his dominance, Cyan stepped back and issued a command: sword manipulation. Instantly, Kieram's form stiffened, her movements ceasing entirely. As she collapsed, he offered her a final warning, suggesting she accept him as her master while he still retained a modicum of patience. Restrained and unable to move, Kieram's thoughts raced, wondering how Cyan could wield the incantation with such precision. Despite her defiance, Cyan repeated the command with unwavering authority. Each utterance of demonic sword control pressed her head further into the ground, forcing submission. With a final, begrudging tone, Kieram conceded, her resistance giving way as she addressed him as master. Cyan acknowledged her submission with little more than a glance. His thoughts turned to his next move. He had accomplished his purpose here and considered whether it was time to return. He realized he had been away for far too long. As he exited the basement, Kieram's voice broke the silence, filled with relief and curiosity. She remarked on the freshness of the air, marveling at how invigorating it felt after so long. She addressed him playfully, asking for his name. Without hesitation, he responded, introducing himself as Cyan Vert. Her confusion was immediate, expressing disbelief at the unfamiliar name. She questioned how Aeru could have chosen someone so young. Cyan remained unperturbed, casually confirming that he had been chosen, though his connection with Aeru came from his past life. Kieram, taken aback, demanded clarification, but Cyan simply stated that he had died once before. Her shock deepened, and she glanced at the holy sword nearby, noting its dormant state. He explained that the sword's owner would not awaken for another 20 years, a revelation that left her questioning how he seemed to know the future with such certainty. Without offering much explanation, Cyan firmly gripped his dagger and, with decisive force, severed its handle. Kieram's reaction was immediate, a mixture of surprise and fear. She demanded to know what he planned to do with the broken handle. Cyan's response came with a sly, devious smile, suggesting that it might make the future more interesting. Time passed swiftly, and the day of departure arrived. That afternoon, a carriage rolled away from the ancestral mansion. Cyan, now clad in armor, reflected on how quickly the moment had come. Time, it seemed, had moved faster than expected. As the convoy arrived, Cyan approached, offering formal greetings to the Duke. Turning to Cyan, the Duke asked one final question, giving him an opportunity to reconsider. He assured Cyan that he would not stop him if he chose to withdraw. Cyan bowed respectfully, his resolve unshaken. He replied with certainty that his heart already belonged to the battlefront. Accepting this, the Duke ordered his knight, Jurkin, to proceed. Jurkin obeyed, producing a magic scroll. As the scroll activated, a glowing magic circle illuminated the area, summoning a fearsome beast. A creature with a fiery body emerged from the light, its bloodthirsty gaze fixed on Cyan. It was a hellhound, a low-ranked demonic beast native to Lamea Valley. Cyan observed the knights and his father, noting the effort they must have invested in preparing this test. Gripping his sword tightly, he reassured himself that they would step in if the situation became too dangerous. The Duke, standing watch, reminded him of the weight of responsibility. Every action carried consequence, and the trial before him was meant to demonstrate the strength of his resolve. As the word trial lingered in Cyan's mind, he recalled a recent conversation with Jurkin about arranging a duel. With only 3 days left to fulfill his promise to his father, he knew aimlessly practicing sword swings would not suffice. He had sought a real fight to hone his skills. Jurkin had suggested someone of Cyan's age, like young Master Krantz, as a potential opponent. However, Cyan dismissed the idea, mentioning that Krantz always seemed to avoid him. The hassle of chasing him down was not worth the effort. Jurkin, after some hesitation, agreed to spar instead, though he clarified he would use only a sheathed sword and focus solely on defense. Cyan had instructed him not to inform the Duke of the arrangement, emphasizing that it was an order. As the sparring began, Cyan launched an aggressive attack. Jurkin, wielding his sheathed sword, found himself astounded by the strength behind Cyan's strikes. Despite being only 10 years old, Cyan displayed remarkable speed and power. Jurkin thought to himself how heavy the blows felt, struggling to reconcile them with the age of his opponent. Cyan's movements grew sharper and more unpredictable, vanishing from Jurkin's line of sight in a mere instant. Jurkin, momentarily distracted, was caught off guard as Cyan reappeared behind him, delivering another strike. Though Jurkin remained stationary, focused purely on defense, the sheer intensity of Cyan's swordsmanship left him astonished. Cyan acknowledged his limits, silently admitting that defeating Jurkin was beyond his current ability. Still, the sparring session had served its purpose. Concluding the duel, Cyan expressed his gratitude. Jurkin, equally impressed, praised Cyan's progress. Internally, Jurkin marveled at the transformation of the young master he had once considered weak. If his earlier suspicions had been correct, Cyan's growth meant he could now face any trial with confidence. Returning to the present, Cyan stood before a massive monster, prepared for the next stage of his training. In an instant, his body disappeared from its original position, his swift movements propelling him toward the creature. A moment later, he reappeared, having delivered a powerful strike as he passed by. Despite the impact, Cyan recognized that his current strength was insufficient for prolonged combat against such a foe. Determined to avoid being overwhelmed, he resolved to end the battle as quickly as possible. Cyan advanced with determination, channeling his energy into the sword in his right hand. He leaped high into the air, a powerful surge of focus guiding his movements. With precision, he thrust the blade downwards, piercing the monster's head. The scene unfolded with awe. The sheer force of the attack left the onlookers in silence. His father's face brightened with pride as Cyan stood over the fallen beast. Cyan's thoughts wandered momentarily, amused by the idea of bottling the abundant blood spilling from the creature. Yet, he dismissed the notion, aware of how odd such an act would seem to those around him. The Duke's applause broke the quiet, his voice filled with approval as he commended Cyan's skill. He declared his readiness to see Cyan at the battlefront. Cyan acknowledged his father's words with gratitude, standing firm in his resolve. Kieram's voice interrupted the moment, tinged with irritation. The sword spirit expressed disdain, likening itself to a mere kitchen knife in Cyan's hands. Cyan responded with measured reassurance, reminding Kieram of its true nature as a demonic sword. Kieram's plea for blood to regain strength was met with Cyan's promise of future use, a promise that carried an edge of anticipation. Transitioning to the battlefield, chaos erupted as a group of ogres launched an attack. The soldiers responded swiftly, organizing a defensive line to counter the threat. Magic users cast spells, their radiant light forcing the ogres to recoil. Threads of binding magic emerged from smaller circles, immobilizing the creatures. With the command to strike, the army unleashed its full might upon the restrained ogres, overwhelming them with precision and force. A warrior charged into the fray, decapitating an ogre with a swift stroke. The severed head landed near Cyan, who observed the scene from atop his horse. Emily, his maid, stood behind him, trembling with fear. She questioned Cyan's decision to be present in such a perilous place, her voice betraying her anxiety. Cyan, however, viewed the unfolding battle with a mix of nostalgia and unease, recalling the familiarity of such chaos. The Duke approached, asking Cyan how he felt witnessing the front lines. Cyan admitted to some nervousness, but resolved to remain vigilant. His father's reminder of the ever-present danger resonated deeply, and Cyan's confident smile masked his growing determination. As the battle subsided, Cyan's assigned tent provided a semblance of safety at the rear of the encampment. Reflecting on his surroundings, he noted the disciplined guards and considered the delay in feeding Kieram. Frustration simmered as he contemplated his restricted circumstances. Emily's bustling presence provided little comfort. Her insistence on staying by his side grated on his nerves. To prepare for his departure, Cyan left a doll resembling himself on his bed. Emily's inquiry about his intentions revealed her suspicion of his plans. Cyan's reply, cloaked in casual dismissal, did little to quell her concerns. Donning his cloak, he stepped out into the night, his swift movements carrying him toward his next endeavor. Due to the heightened night guard duties on the front lines, moving freely was a challenge. Cyan executed the skill of the Black Mist, third move, Misty's Descent. He recalled that the area was filled with monsters, making it an ideal opportunity to wield Kieram. The demonic sword, sensing the strong scent of blood, grew restless and urged Cyan to let it cut something down. At that moment, a pack of hellhounds charged towards Cyan. He acknowledged Kieram's eagerness and decided to proceed. Using the skill Mist Blade, Misty Tempest, Cyan maneuvered through the hellhound pack with lethal precision, leaving their bodies lifeless in his wake. Afterward, at the corpse of one of the hellhounds, he inserted a sharp tube into a blood vessel, allowing the blood to flow into a wooden cup. He drank it heartily, expressing satisfaction with the quality of the blood. Kieram, too, expressed its refreshment and eagerness to grow stronger. Cyan evaluated their progress, assuring Kieram that the night was still young and the area teeming with monsters. Before them, another herd of beasts awaited. Kieram's excitement grew as they prepared for the next confrontation. Elsewhere, a group of horse-drawn carriages traveled. Within one sat a young lady with white hair. A companion expressed concern about the dangers of the front lines, suggesting they turn back. The young lady, the royal princess of the empire, dismissed the suggestion firmly. She reiterated her duty to assist her father on his tours and warned against further attempts to dissuade her. The conversation shifted to news of the youngest son of the Vert family being on the front lines. It was mentioned that the boy had volunteered himself, and the princess was encouraged to get along with him since they were of the same age. However, she dismissed this as trivial and decided to rest. Before falling asleep, she learned his name, Cyan Vert. On the battlefield, the Vert family fought against monsters. A bird-shaped creature fell to their attacks as the battle concluded. The Lord called for a status check, and the soldiers confirmed no injuries. Pleased, the Lord commended their efforts and instructed them to return to camp. His attention was briefly drawn to something unusual. Meanwhile, Cyan finished off another monster and sheathed his sword. His father approached, inquiring about his adjustment to life on the front lines. Cyan responded respectfully, noting that he was learning something new every day. Surprised, his father acknowledged Cyan's perseverance and expressed pride in him. This unexpected praise left Cyan deep in thought. Before leaving, his father mentioned wanting to discuss something the next morning and instructed Cyan to come to his tent. Later that night, in the monster territory, the sounds of movement and attacks echoed. A large monster attacked from underground, prompting Cyan to evade and observe. It was a deathworm, a creature that usually resided deeper in the valley. Kieram suggested taking over, pointing out the creature's regenerative abilities that rendered shallow injuries ineffective. Cyan, aware of Kieram's potential schemes, hesitated but ultimately agreed. The fusion process began as Cyan activated Black Mist, 9th form, magical sword manifestation. His body became enveloped in dark, blood-like energy. In a blur of sharp strikes, the deathworm's body was shredded. Merging with Kieram and channeling their power beneath the seemingly crimson moon, Cyan executed Mist Blade, 8th form, fluttering petals. The technique cleaved through the deathworm entirely, leaving its body in several pieces. Cyan stood amidst the remains, victorious. Later, on the battlefield, someone examined the monster's bloodstains and noted that the creature had not been dead for long. Jerkin, holding a torch, remarked from behind that the mana emanating from the area felt unusually intense. He speculated whether a demon might have been responsible for the carnage. Cyan's father, standing nearby, declared that such a possibility could not be ignored and immediately ordered the area to be inspected thoroughly. The soldiers were instructed to burn the corpse without delay. As they complied, Cyan's father scrutinized the sword traces left on the monster's body. A sense of familiarity crept over him as he silently wondered if his mind was playing tricks, questioning whether the peculiar marks were merely a coincidence. Jerkin, observing something of significance, called for his attention. In front of them lay the massive corpse of a deathworm. Shock rippled through the group. It was a deathworm, something that should have been nearly impossible to kill. The question of who could have accomplished such a feat lingered heavily in the air. Jerkin voiced a theory, considering whether the act could have been carried out by a certain organization. The presence of the demonic sword manifestation technique loomed over the discussion. Allowing Kieram to take control unleashed her full power, but doing so always came with risks. She could completely overpower Cyan if his guard slipped. At Cyan's location, he lay sprawled on his bed, thoroughly drained. Exhaustion coursed through his body, and he inwardly reflected on the reckless nature of relying on Kieram to defeat even a single foe. The toll on his body was undeniable, yet he acknowledged that drinking the blood of demonic beasts had fortified him. Had this been a month earlier, his body might not have withstood the strain. Kieram observed his state with an almost analytical air. Her tone carried a mix of curiosity and suspicion as she remarked on his behavior and abilities. She noted that while he appeared to be a child outwardly, his actions, words, and handling of her suggested otherwise. His mastery over the geography of the Lamea Valley and the mist sword techniques spoke to decades of experience, not the abilities of someone his apparent age. Furthermore, she had pieced together his earlier statements and confidently concluded that he was a regressor. Cyan responded with a lazy, indifferent expression, as though the revelation mattered little. He questioned whether he hadn't made it obvious enough already, given his earlier comments about dying before. Kieram reacted with a heavy silence, clearly unimpressed, before snapping in frustration that it was hardly obvious when he had explained nothing. Cyan's nonchalant attitude persisted as he brushed off her concerns, admitting that he lacked the motivation to elaborate. Kieram, undeterred, pressed on with her suspicions. She speculated that killing someone like Cyan would have been no small task, deducing that his death must have involved the owner of Duran Dark. She considered the possibilities, whether he had fallen in a duel or through betrayal, and confidently concluded it was the latter. Cyan inquired about Kieram's thoughts on the matter. Kieram responded by observing Cyan's disdain on Holy Sword. Kieram admitted he would be foolish if he couldn't discern Cyan's intentions, deducing that revenge must be Cyan's goal regardless of the circumstances. He warned Cyan to be mindful, threatening to eliminate him if he faltered or lost control. Without hesitation, Cyan immediately punched Kieram, sending her flying with a disdainful expression. He asserted that Kieram should know her place, emphasizing that he was not an idiot. Kieram spun silently, and Cyan smiled to himself, thinking that she hadn't changed at all. She remained the same as she was in his previous life. At that moment, Cyan left his camp to observe the surrounding atmosphere. He pondered the current chaos, noting that the day seemed unusually tumultuous. Emily approached him, addressing him as young master and informing him that it was his turn. When Cyan asked if something had happened, Emily replied with a worried expression, explaining that a high-level monster's corpse had been found near the entrance of the valley. Cyan realized she was referring to the deathworm. He wondered silently. Emily continued, mentioning that it had been a long time since there was a sighting of a high-level monster near the camps. Cyan, fearing that he might be discovered as the one who killed the deathworm, hastily asked if there was anything else. Emily appeared flustered. Cyan attempted to inquire further, asking if there had been any reports of suspicious individuals or anything related to him. However, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jerkin, who approached from behind and informed Cyan that the Duke wanted to see him immediately. Feeling uneasy, Cyan silently evaluated the situation. He lamented that he couldn't manage the corpses of the monsters because soldiers had suddenly appeared, disrupting his plan to enjoy a quiet life before entering the academy. Now, at his father's camp, Cyan bowed respectfully and greeted his father as the youngest son of the Verts. He secretly hoped his father wouldn't recognize him. His father responded with a serious tone, requesting Cyan to sit down. Cyan contemplated what excuses he could offer if his father inquired about the previous night's incident. His father asked directly what he had been doing last night. Anxiously, Cyan replied that he had gone to bed early because he was tired. Upon hearing this, Williers thought that while Cyan claimed to have gone to bed early, the traces of swordsmanship suggested otherwise. He wondered if he was overthinking it. Feigning ignorance, Cyan asked why his father was asking. His father didn't respond, seeming skeptical that someone so young could have slain a deathworm. The Duke explained that he was sure Cyan had heard about the incident near the camps last night, and that they needed to investigate further. It appeared to be the work of a secret assassin organization. Cyan pretended not to know anything about it. His father continued, describing the organization as one that had existed since ancient times. Their goals were unknown, but they had assassinated countless nobles under the guise of purification. They were infamous for leaving behind a black mist wherever they appeared. However, one day, they had disappeared and were last seen 300 years ago. The corpse of the deathworm from the previous night was enveloped in black mist. Black mist is the trace left behind by Aeru, the god of darkness, who is worshipped by the mist and serves as the source of their power. If Williers' assumptions are correct, the mist were responsible for slaying the deathworm and the other demonic beasts. Internally, Cyan marveled at his ability to precisely identify the culprit despite the organization having been last seen 3 centuries ago. His father advised that they couldn't determine the reason for the organization's sudden appearance, but cautioned Cyan to remain vigilant. He assured Cyan that he would notify the Empire about the incident and investigate further. Obediently, Cyan responded affirmatively, while also thinking that his father was likely to believe him. His father found it hard to believe that Cyan was involved with such an organization at his young age. He then declared that the conversation was over and inquired if Cyan had been informed about who was visiting that day. Cyan replied that he had heard His Majesty would be visiting, but was unsure if it was scheduled for that day. His father smiled and confirmed, expressing that he wanted to ask Cyan for a favor regarding the visit. Curious and anxious, Cyan asked for more details, but before his father could respond, a soldier interrupted, announcing the Emperor's arrival. Cyan's father went outside, kneeling and addressing the Emperor with respect as the king appeared on horseback, calling out to Williers. The king dismounted, approached Williers, and assisted him up, remarking that they were old friends and asking him not to be overly polite since he had the king's permission. Williers still felt some apprehension and greeted the emperor respectfully. The king's gaze then shifted to Cyan's position, prompting Cyan to bow and introduce himself as Cyan Vert, the youngest of the Verts. The king complimented Cyan, noting it was impressive for someone so young to reside in such a rough environment, and remarked that his children were definitely different from ordinary ones. Feeling more at ease, Cyan thought he was curious about the favor his father had mentioned, but realized his father merely wanted him to appeal as his son. Cyan reflected on how he had always been confined to the mansion in his past life. As the emperor visited, Emily nearby exclaimed that the emperor had arrived. Deeply touched by his father's trust, Cyan watched as the king called a servant to introduce someone else. From the drawn carriage emerged a beautiful woman who introduced herself as Arin Sevelus, the fifth princess of the empire. Cyan observed the princess, thinking of her as the tragic fifth princess. Before the emperor's arrival, Cyan and his father spoke at the camp, where his father informed him that he would need to escort the princess for the day. Cyan wondered about the significance of this task, but his father reassured him not to be surprised. He explained that Cyan just needed to keep her company since they were the same age, and that Cyan would see her again once he entered the academy. Cyan recalled seeing her at the academy in his past life, remembering observing her a few times between classes. His father remarked that there was no harm in becoming acquainted with someone from the royal family. He mentioned it wouldn't take long, but expressed a desire for Cyan to get along with her. Cyan silently evaluated the situation, feeling reluctant but understanding his father's intentions. He suspected that his father wished for them to develop a friendship similar to the one he had with the emperor. However, Cyan felt that his father had chosen the wrong person for such a friendship. He concluded that she could not become his friend, though he couldn't voice this thought as it pertained to a future only he was aware of. Annoyed, Cyan decided he would have to remain obedient for the time being. At that moment, images of the battlefield appeared. Arin inquired about the river's redness. Cyan explained that she must be referring to the Blood River, a stream running through the entirety of the Lamea Valley. There wasn't any complex reason for the water's redness. Demonic beasts, whether old or injured and unable to compete for survival, would instinctively leap into the Blood River. Their corpses and bodily fluids dissolved into the river, turning it red due to mana-induced decomposition. Arin, alarmed, sought confirmation if that was the sole reason for the river's condition. Cyan affirmed, adding that the demonic beasts also drank and washed in it, making it very disgusting and advising against entering. Arin grimaced and pressed further, inquiring about what lay at the end of the river. Cyan responded that it led to the demon realm. She questioned whether the demon realm was where the demons lived. With a mischievous smile, Cyan affirmed and added that if one continued following the river, they might even encounter the Demon King. Internally, Cyan thought that no sane person would pursue that path, finding amusement in teasing her. Suddenly, the sky signaled with a flare. Arin curiously inquired about the light. Cyan explained that it was the 3rd sentry post in the west, where a yellow light signifies incoming demonic beasts. Arin, somewhat fearful, questioned if there were demonic beasts nearby. Williers ordered the protection of His Majesty, stating that the Guardian Knight Division troops would accompany him to the 3rd sentry post in the west. The Emperor, wearing a cheerful expression, remarked to Williers that he did not intend to go on a hike and had been growing increasingly bored. Hesitant, Williers reluctantly complied. The king proclaimed that they would join the demonic beast raid, focusing on eliminating the beasts until the raid concluded. All the soldiers responded in unison with affirmation. Williers turned to Cyan and instructed that he join as well. Cyan promptly agreed. The princess incredulously questioned his ability to fight the demonic beasts. Cyan responded that he could, although he was still just supporting from the back, and advised seeking shelter. Arin hastily demanded to be taken along. Cyan wondered about the princess's insistence, and the attendant beside her attempted to restrain her. However, Arin persisted, stating that since Cyan was the same age as her, she could accompany him. Cyan warned that people died in that area, and that it was not a playground. Arin remained undeterred, declaring her intention to go and asserting that no one could stop her. Frustrated by her stubbornness, Cyan angrily summoned his knight, Jurkin. With a terrifying demeanor, Jurkin assured that he would substitute the royal knights and escort Her Highness to safety in the camps, initiating their departure. Arin, though somewhat scared, remained defiant and rebuked Cyan for treating her, a princess, in such a manner. Cyan, with a menacing look, leaned close to Arin's face and warned that dozens of knights might die due to her stubbornness. He emphasized that a split-second decision could determine their fate in the war, questioning whether she could take responsibility for all those lives. Hearing this, Arin felt so scared that she almost burst into tears. Cyan walked away, leaving her behind with the knights, and instructed her to go back if she was going to cry like a child, "Your Highness." At that moment, Arin could only stand and watch Cyan leave in silence. At the center of the battlefield, a monster resembling a giant snail was devouring the foot soldiers. The soldiers screamed for defense, urging each other to fend off the beast, stand their ground, and not to fall back. Williers then appeared brandishing his sword and ordered the troops to get back into formation, protect his majesty, and slay all the monsters without sparing even a single one. Upon hearing his command, all the soldiers charged into battle with unwavering determination. Arin Sevelus, the emperor of the Wusif Empire, had 2 wives. Diana Quizzle was his first wife, but she is now dead. Cassandra Nephilis is his second wife and is considered the prominent judiciary of the empire. The former Empress Dion gave birth to the first and second princesses, while the current Empress Cassandra gave birth to the third and fourth princes. However, Arin Sevelus, the 5th princess, was a bastardized daughter born to a peasant mistress. People treated her as a scarecrow-like princess due to her mixed blood, but she did not care about how others perceived her. She fulfilled her duty as part of the royal family and devoted herself to her studies more than anyone else. However, she was framed for treason by those who resented her and was expelled from the royal family and the empire. Rumors spread that she died alone from a disease on an island, leading people to call her the tragic princess. It was believed that she could have lived a happy life had she not been greedy, and that it would have been better for her to live without any ambition. After recounting the story, Kieram questioned whether that was what Cyan's father had always told him in his past life. Cyan, who was currently engaged in battle with the monsters, responded that it was different, explaining that such was the nature of royal politics. At that moment, a giant snail was struck by powerful lightning, its body thoroughly cooked. Other giant snails suffered a similar fate. Cyan stood nearby, observing and evaluating that the emperor was skilled with his holy lightning ability. The king was slaughtering all the giant snails within his reach. Cyan noted that Emperor Dion was publicly recognized for his 8-star magic prowess, and that had he not become emperor, he probably would have been the Mage Association's head. Cyan understood that an intermediate-ranked demonic beast would pose no challenge, considering that being an emperor seemed to be his hobby. After a period of fighting within the camp, the emperor and Williers sat together, enjoying wine. The emperor mentioned that it had been a while since they had shared a drink. The emperor admitted feeling quite lonely, noting that he was the only one drinking. Williers apologized, explaining that he did not permit himself to drink on the front lines. At that point, the emperor changed the subject, recalling when Williers had inquired about the current atmosphere in the empire. He noted that there had been a recent increase in the assassination of nobles, which was causing widespread anxiety. Williers inquired whether there were any patterns to these assassinations. The emperor confirmed that all the victims were corrupt officials and that black mist had been present at each murder scene. Upon hearing this detail, Williers pondered thoughtfully. The emperor then asked if Williers had any ideas. Williers responded that he had discovered traces of black mist in the area the previous day, suggesting that the followers of Black Mist might be mobilizing again. The emperor agreed that this made sense, but emphasized the need for further investigation. He appreciated Williers' efforts in managing the situation, but expressed concern about the growing anxiety among the people. Additionally, the emperor mentioned another troubling matter. A noble was spreading rumors that blamed the 5th princess for the assassinations. Williers sought clarification, confirming that individuals were attempting to associate Princess Arin with the incidents. The emperor elaborated that he had been dismissing these claims as nonsense, but suspected that a group intended to exploit her. He then requested a personal favor from Williers, not as an emperor, but as a friend, to take care of Princess Arin if he were to die before Williers. Accepting the emperor's request with a serious demeanor, Williers assured that he would carry out the emperor's orders to completion. Pleased by Williers' assurance, the emperor thanked him. Heavy rain poured at the campsite. Inside Cyan's tent, Emily felt frustrated and questioned him, prompting him to respond curtly, indicating that was all he had to say. Emily firmly countered, expressing that Cyan's actions were unacceptable, stating that as the princess, ending the escort would jeopardize any chances of marriage. Feeling overwhelmed by Emily's criticism, Cyan thought to himself that she might have thought he was planning a date. He then left the tent, telling Emily that he trusted her to manage things in his absence. Emily voiced her concern, asking if Cyan was heading to training despite the severe rain. Cyan reassured her not to worry and advised her not to stay up waiting for him either. As Cyan was about to depart, a girl cloaked in rain stood outside his tent, waiting. Puzzled by her presence, Cyan observed the stranger while Emily, filled with fear, asked who she was. The stranger then removed her hood, revealing herself as Princess Arin, and inquired where Cyan was intending to go. Arin approached Cyan and requested a conversation, apologizing if he was busy. Quickly changing her demeanor, Emily welcomed Arin warmly. Outside Cyan's camp, not only soldiers from his family were present, but also royal soldiers. Arin inquired how long Cyan had been there. Cyan responded that it had been about a month, and then curiously asked her the reason for her visit. Arin sensed something slightly ominous behind her and asked if they could be excused for a moment. Cyan turned to Emily and instructed her to go outside for a bit. Before leaving, Emily agreed and wished them a good time together. With everything quiet, Cyan thought to himself that spending time with a 10-year-old wouldn't be enjoyable, correcting his own thought by noting he was 40 in this situation. Arin hesitantly apologized for her earlier behavior, expressing that she felt she hadn't acted as a princess should. Cyan responded politely, assuring her there was no need to worry and apologize for being rude. Arin smiled and reciprocated, saying she would have done the same in his place. Her smile faded, and a slightly saddened expression took over her face as she continued, noting that Cyan was acknowledged by many people, unlike herself, and that he was much more mature. Observing Arin's change in demeanor, Cyan recognized the kind of personality she possessed. Arin then expressed her desire, mentioning that Cyan was entering the academy as well and suggested they become friends. Understanding her suggestion, Cyan interrupted her before she could finish. His face turned serious, with a hint of intimidation, as he firmly declined, stating that he didn't believe he could be of any help to her. This response made Arin feel fearful for a moment. Cyan clarified his stance, indicating that if Arin was here to make friends, she should leave. Arin attempted to persuade Cyan, explaining that she just wanted them to be on good terms. She remarked on his harshness, questioning if he also thought she was merely a shell of a princess. Without receiving a response to her difficult question, Arin continued, acknowledging that there was likely no benefit in being friends with her and apologized for wasting his time. Deciding to leave, she stated that she had been short-sighted in thinking they could at least talk, and remarked that Cyan was completely different from what Sir Echelle had said. Upon hearing the mention of his betraying brother, Cyan became visibly unsettled, deeply pondering the implications of the words he had just heard. In that moment of intense distress, he lost control and tightly gripped Arin's hand, desperate to prevent her from leaving. Concerned for his well-being, Arin inquired about the cause of his distress. Cyan responded with a cold demeanor, questioning how Arin had come to know about his brother. Fearfully, Arin explained that she had become acquainted with Echelle during her tour of the Royal Academy the previous year. During that time, Echelle had advised her not to concern herself with others' opinions and to focus solely on fulfilling her duties as a princess. Upon hearing this revelation, Cyan comprehended the gravity of the situation. He thought to himself that he understood Echelle's personality, the demonic bastard's nature, better than anyone else. The plan to undermine Princess Arin had commenced as soon as she had met Echelle. Cyan felt a surge of fury but remained worried as he issued a warning to Arin. However, his warning was abruptly interrupted when their camp was suddenly shaken by an unexpected and violent disturbance. Emily rushed into the camp from outside, urgently informing them that the young master needed to flee immediately. At that precise moment, a massive log crashed down onto Cyan's tent from above with such speed that its approach went completely unnoticed. The entire camp was obliterated in an instant, leaving devastation in its wake. Fortunately, Emily had been outside the attack range, and thus escaped death unscathed. Standing before them was a colossal monster, holding a tree branch, towering menacingly. Panic ensued as people began shouting to one another, cursing and exclaiming that the young master's tent was under attack, urgently urging others to verify his safety. Emily, overwhelmed by fear, crouched on the ground, her heart racing as she desperately called out for her young master. Meanwhile, the shock of the attack had reached Willier's camp, causing both the Emperor and Williers to become increasingly worried and highly uncertain about the unfolding events. A soldier entered the camp to report the dire situation, and the Emperor's face darkened with deep concern as he inquired about the details of the report. The soldier explained that advanced-ranked demonic beasts had ambushed the rear camps in the border regions and believed that the princess was present during the attack. In response to this alarming news, the Emperor urgently ordered all members of the Imperial Army to head to the rear camps without delay to ensure the princess's safety. The Emperor pondered the perplexing situation, questioning how the princess had come to be in the rear camps and whom she might be intending to meet in such a dangerous and volatile area. The narrative then shifted to the area under attack by the monsters, where two ogres emerged from the chaos, wreaking havoc and causing further destruction. Cyan, having survived the initial attack, was now hiding and carefully assessing the increasingly dire and chaotic situation around him. He observed that deathworms and ogres were typically creatures that resided only in the deeper, more secluded regions of the valley. Their unexpected presence in the rear camps indicated that something significant had changed in the dynamics of the area. Cyan wondered whether this change was a direct consequence of his own actions or involvement. Emily cried out in anguish, expressing that she had believed the young master to be truly dead and vowed never to leave his side again, her voice filled with joy. Returning to the time of the attack, Cyan had swiftly jumped off, managed to hold on to Arin, and dodged to the side to avoid the fatal blow from the giant log. He silently evaluated his own strength and capabilities, recalling that in his earlier days, he had even killed the Demon King, which suggested that he was not about to perish to what he considered a mere troll-like creature. Arin, clearly worried, asked whether the knights in the camps were safe. Emily reassured her by stating that there was no need to worry, as the knights were exceptionally strong and well-trained in combat. Arin, in a moment of intense emotion, hugged her face and cried, believing that this dire situation would not have occurred had she not come here. The knights accompanying them reassured Arin, affirming that they were all right and that it was their duty as the Knights of the Empire to protect her at all costs, emphasizing their unwavering and steadfast commitment to her safety and well-being. The remaining knight also smiled confidently and affirmed that he was right, assuring the Highness that they would protect her with their lives. Suddenly, Cyan's expression turned serious as he warned the knights to move. The knights didn't grasp his meaning and remained unaware of the imminent danger approaching from behind. In the next moment, the troll's large hand grasped one knight's body, and with a single grip, the knight was killed. Cyan stepped forward to protect Arin and instructed her to step back. Seeing Cyan's appearance, the ogre seemed to recognize something. Cyan immediately realized that the ogre had recognized him. Upon identifying its target, the troll threw the knight's body aside. Cyan urgently told everyone he would distract the troll, urging them to flee with the princess. Emily agreed without hesitation, not worrying about Cyan. She carried Arin and questioned the other knight actions, prompting him to leave. Cyan thought angrily, realizing that Emily was eager to leave. The troll raised both hands to attack Cyan, who prepared to counter. In the next moment, Cyan's sword cut through the troll's arm. After the attack, Cyan wondered why all the advanced-ranked demonic beasts were attracted to him, feeling as though they could smell something on him. Kieram chuckled maliciously, explaining Cyan of drinking the blood of countless demonic beasts to become strong, explaining that it was the reason Cyan had killed so many of them. Kieram added that it would be strange if the beasts did not come for him. Cyan urgently asked why Kieram was revealing this information just now, to which Kieram smirked and replied that Cyan had forgotten her true purpose. Before Kieram could answer, Cyan squeezed her shadow form, and the magic sword appeared. Kieram complained about Cyan's actions, pleading to be treated better. Cyan demanded silence, stating he didn't care how many monsters approached him. After making his declaration, Cyan rushed towards the troll. The troll threw a punch at him, but Cyan dodged and approached its head, cutting it off. The troll's heavy body fell to the ground. Cyan declared that now that no one was watching, they should go sip on some advanced-ranked demonic beast blood. In front of him stood a crowd of large monsters. Kieram excitedly announced that it was going to be a feast, but then he noticed something and called for caution as a large dragon with a purple body appeared. Cyan exclaimed that it was a devil dragon, and its roar echoed around them. Kieram confirmed that it was still a baby and added that the dragon also smelled Cyan. Cyan smiled maliciously, thinking it didn't matter why the dragon was there. The demonic sword manifestation caused Cyan and Kieram's spirit power to merge. What mattered was that Cyan wasn't missing out on a chance like this. With a confident and intimidating face, Cyan declared that they had to catch the dragon. Kieram objected, stating that they had to eat it. On another side of the camp, a monster was attacked by several golden lightning bolts. The Emperor asked Williers if this was the last one. Williers replied that it seemed so. The Emperor then inquired about the princess and Williers' son. Williers responded that he couldn't find their traces past the tent. The Emperor apologized, assuring Williers that it was fine and understanding that he was surely worried about his son too. Trusting in Cyan, Williers replied that there was no need to worry about his son, emphasizing that what mattered right now was the princess. The Emperor thought that was cold, but Williers affirmed that a Vert should know to watch out for himself. At that moment, someone came to report to the Emperor that they had found the princess. The Emperor asked for confirmation, and immediately after, Arin rushed in calling for her father. The Emperor inquired about her condition and whether she was hurt anywhere. Arin, worried, said they needed to hurry to save him. The Emperor asked whom they needed to save. Arin explained that because of her, he was in danger. The Emperor asked her to calm down and to tell him what was going on. Williers stepped forward and addressed Cyan's maid. Emily replied, with a terrifyingly dark face, that she is. Williers demanded to know if something had happened to Cyan. Emily, frightened, thought she was scared as she had never seen the Duke look so scary before. Trembling, she stuttered that the young master acted as bait to give them time to run away. Hearing this, Williers' eyes sharpened as he looked at Emily. The royal soldier next to them immediately said he remembered where Cyan was last. He added that if the Emperor just gave an order, he would go with others to save the young master. The Emperor urged him to do so. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Williers remained silent for a moment before stating firmly that they would not proceed with the proposed course of action. His decision left many puzzled. The Emperor questioned him again, asking with disbelief if Williers was serious. With composure, Williers explained that the immediate priority was addressing the current situation. If the camps fell, the demonic beast would invade the empire. The place had to be reconstructed immediately to prevent further loss of life. Emily, though terrified, found the courage to question what would happen to the young master. With a cold demeanor, Williers stated that Cyan had fulfilled his duty by aiding the princess's evacuation, demonstrating what it meant to be a Vert. Hearing this, the princess felt a surge of guilt, wondering why such sacrifices had to be made because of her yet again. Their discussion was interrupted by a piercing cry from above. Arin turned her attention skyward, recognizing the sound, a dragon. Above them, a dragon soared majestically, and soon she spotted Cyan clinging desperately to one of its legs. Cyan's face bore a defeated expression, tears streaming down his cheeks as he struggled to hold on. Dragons, revered as rare and noble creatures closest to the Creator, were rarely approached by humans. Yet here was Cyan, clinging to one, his heart torn between honor and dread. As the dragon flew over the camp, directly above Arin, she called out Cyan's name in worry. The king, astounded by the sight, exclaimed at the unbelievable scene. He demanded to know why Williers' son was on the dragon and whether Williers intended to rescue him. Williers, visibly worried, remained silent, deep in contemplation. Meanwhile, Cyan struggled atop the dragon, cursing his predicament. His original intention had been merely to drink the creature's blood, but now he was caught in this chaotic situation. Earlier, he had confronted the dragon after merging with Kieram, determined to defeat it. Facing a horde of monsters blocking his path, Cyan had cursed them for wasting his time and unleashed his mist sword skill, Russian Mist Storm. In a blur of motion, he sliced through hundreds of monstrous foes, leaving a trail of destruction before landing face-to-face with the dragon. Observing the dragon, Cyan noted its smaller size, indicating it was not fully grown. The creature immediately retaliated, firing a powerful energy beam. Cyan dodged swiftly, remarking sarcastically about the attack's brightness as he closed the distance to strike. Kieram, his companion, criticized Cyan's brashness, to which Cyan responded with annoyance, claiming the dragon deserved what it got. His strikes wounded the dragon, causing it to roar in pain and release a burst of air pressure that hurled Cyan backward. Rather than being deterred, Cyan's excitement grew. The dragon, seeing Cyan as a threat, lunged at him with its horn, but Cyan evaded and countered with his swordless fluttering petals technique. His strikes left the dragon with deep wounds, and it plummeted from the sky, stirring up clouds of dust upon impact. Cyan, facing the downed dragon, admitted to himself that he wasn't yet strong enough to fully defeat such a creature. As Cyan prepared to finish the battle, the dragon suddenly rose, its sharp eyes fixed on him. A powerful gust of wind surged from its body, but Cyan held his ground, refusing to fall for the same trick twice. To his surprise, the dragon turned and fled, tail tucked. Realizing the creature's sensitivity to his attacks, Cyan panicked and pursued, unwilling to let it escape. This chase led to the current moment, where Cyan clung to the dragon's leg midair, his thoughts consumed by his predicament. Reflecting on his dwindling luck, he deliberated his next move. Kieram, appearing beside him, demanded to know why he was hesitating. Cyan, irritated, pointed out the people below them, emphasizing that using the demonic sword in their presence would result in dire consequences, including being burned at the stake. Kieram rebuked him for his indecision, urging him to act. As Cyan argued with Kieram, Williers, still on the ground, focused intently on casting an advanced spell. Cyan recognized the intricate golden swords forming within the magic circle, identifying it as 8-star advanced magic, the fabled secret sword of the heavens. Knowing that his son would be caught up in the chaos when the moment arrived, Williers cast his spell. Dozens of swords materialized, flying toward the dragon in a coordinated attack. Cyan, observing the spectacle, muttered in awe about his father truly living up to his title as the continent's guardian. The dragon, showing no fear, dodged and maneuvered through the barrage of swords with remarkable agility. Cyan found amusement in the dragon's skillful evasion, encouraging it with a mix of sarcasm and admiration. However, his tone shifted to worry as a sword aimed for the dragon's blind spot, potentially endangering him as well. Cyan commented nervously that the dragon might not be able to dodge this one. The sword grazed the dragon's leg, and the impact caused Cyan to lose his grip and plummet freely downward. Frustration overtook him as he lamented the missed opportunity for what he considered a special meal. Kieram, his companion, berated him, demanding that he fly or find a way to avoid crashing into the ground. Cyan resisted, knowing that using mist magic in front of onlookers would expose his powers and lead to severe consequences. Kieram, exasperated, accused Cyan of accepting death without a fight. Resigned, Cyan mumbled about his uncertainty, but was suddenly struck with an idea. With renewed hope, Cyan exclaimed that he might have a solution. Kieram, sensing the direction of Cyan's thoughts, guessed his master's plan and questioned if Cyan truly intended to fall into the blood-infested river below. Cyan, seeing no alternative, replied with resignation, acknowledging the grim situation. Moments later, he plunged into the river, infamous for being formed from the blood of monsters. Though far from an ideal outcome, Cyan managed to survive the fall. In a distant place, a devil and a young demon observed the commotion. The young demon noted the rare sight of a dragon flying in the area and speculated about the strong demonic beast likely responsible for the disturbance. The elder demon corrected him, pointing out that humans lived across that border. Doubting the possibility, the younger demon expressed disbelief that a dragon could lose to mere humans. Growing quiet, he sensed something unusual. When asked what was bothering him, he explained that he could feel a strange, yet familiar energy from the area. The elder demon suggested he investigate, cautioning him not to kill indiscriminately out of boredom. The younger demon irritably agreed before spreading his wings and heading towards Cyan's location. Back at the river, columns of bubbles rose from the murky depths as Cyan emerged, gasping for air. Exhausted, he crawled onto the shore and complained bitterly about his predicament. Turning to Kieram, he asked if his companion was still alive. Kieram, soaked and fuming, snapped that he was contemplating how to kill Cyan for his recklessness. Cyan attempted to reassure Kieram, promising to clean up and regroup later. Kieram, clearly agitated, pressed Cyan about his plan, emphasizing the dangers of their surroundings, the demon realm. Cyan dismissed Kieram's concerns, insisting that encountering a higher demon was unlikely. Just as he finished speaking, a voice interrupted, exclaiming excitement at finding something fun. The voice struck a chord of recognition in Cyan, who muttered to himself about the familiarity of the speaker. The source of the voice soon revealed itself. Standing before Cyan was the young demon boy, his face fierce and eyes gleaming with curiosity. The boy demanded to know if Cyan was human. Stunned, Cyan recognized the figure before him as none other than the demon king, Valkyrion. Memories of Valkyrion's fearsome reputation flashed through his mind, an embodiment of evil whom no human dared to challenge. Under his breath, Cyan cursed the timing of this encounter. Valkyrion, calm yet menacing, repeated his question, asking Cyan to confirm whether he was human. Before Cyan could respond, Valkyrion's eyes darkened, and in an instant, he appeared behind Cyan with deadly intent. The demon king's voice, laced with malice, questioned whether Cyan wanted to fight. Reacting instinctively, Cyan swung his dagger, but Valkyrion vanished and reappeared effortlessly. As Cyan's attacks failed, a strand of Valkyrion's hair was cut, an act that prompted a chilling shift in the demon king's demeanor. Instead of anger, Valkyrion chuckled, commenting on Cyan's supposed infinite potential. He acknowledged Cyan's audacity in daring to cut his hair, finding it amusing. Kieram, observing the situation, asked Cyan mentally about the stranger's identity. Cyan, still trembling, identified the figure as the Demon King. Kieram, stunned, questioned how Cyan planned to survive this encounter. Cyan admitted that his only option now was to run. Fear gnawed at him as he doubted his ability to escape Valkyrion's grasp. However, to his surprise, the Demon King reassured him. Valkyrion stated that he had no intention of harming Cyan, urging him to relax. With an unsettling casualness, the Demon King lay down, insisting he wouldn't hurt a child and inviting Cyan to converse without fear. Cyan, baffled by the Demon King's sudden change in behavior, wondered aloud why Valkyrion had chosen to lie down so unexpectedly. Valkyrion chuckled, repeating his question, asking Cyan whether he was human. Cyan confirmed with a hesitant nod. Valkyrion continued, probing further, and asked how Cyan had arrived in the demon realm. Cyan replied that he had come through the current of the river. Valkyrion seemed amused, commenting on the oddity of Cyan's aura and asking who he truly was. Nervously, Cyan denied any special identity, insisting he was just a normal human. Valkyrion smirked, his tone teasing, as he remarked that Cyan's claim of being normal seemed questionable. Cyan's thoughts raced as he insisted silently to himself that they had never met before. Valkyrion, lying relaxed on the ground, mused aloud that this must be true since he had never encountered a human. He wondered aloud when Cyan could have possibly seen him. Cyan remained silent, questioning internally why Valkyrion seemed so casual and whether this was the same Demon King he remembered. Valkyrion spoke again, explaining that he had sensed a strange energy while making his rounds. Cyan, confused, asked what he meant by making rounds. Valkyrion clarified that, as the Demon King, it was his duty to watch over the lands he ruled. Abruptly, Valkyrion asked Cyan to repeat what he had just said. Cyan hesitantly repeated the Demon King's words about his responsibility to oversee his lands. Valkyrion chuckled, commenting on Cyan's unusual reaction. He jokingly added that Cyan's calm demeanor suggested familiarity, asking if his mother had never used him, the Demon King, as a threat to scare him into obedience. Cyan doubted his assumptions, wondering if this truly was the same Demon King he had known in his past life. If events were following the path he remembered, the demon's invasion should begin soon. However, Valkyrion's current demeanor did not align with the monstrous figure from his memories. Cyan speculated about what might have triggered Valkyrion's transformation and resolved to prevent such an event from occurring. Gathering his courage, Cyan asked what Valkyrion sought to accomplish as Demon King. Valkyrion responded with laughter, amused by Cyan's audacity. He stated simply that he wished for his people to live well and eat well. However, he warned that anyone who interfered with that peace would face his wrath. Cyan, while listening, felt a momentary glimpse of the monstrosity he remembered from his past life, though it seemed repressed for now. An idea sprung to mind. Cyan proposed a deal, warning Valkyrion of an impending event that could endanger his people and lead to a war between humans and demons. Valkyrion, intrigued but skeptical, asked Cyan to elaborate. Cyan explained that while he did not know the exact details, he was certain it would ignite a large-scale conflict. Valkyrion questioned whether Cyan was implying that he would seek to invade human lands. Cyan calmly suggested a negotiation, asking Valkyrion to promise not to start a war regardless of what happened. Valkyrion appeared amused by the proposition, asking what Cyan could offer in return. Meeting the Demon King's gaze, Cyan declared that he would do everything in his power to support Valkyrion and help him protect his people. Valkyrion leaned closer, scrutinizing Cyan's expression, and asked for his name. The boy responded firmly, introducing himself as Cyan Vert. Valkyrion nodded, agreeing to the terms. As the ruler of the demon realm, he promised not to invade human lands, no matter the circumstances. However, before departing, Valkyrion reminded Cyan that a deal was a deal and warned him to uphold his end of the bargain. With that, Valkyrion's wings unfolded, and he soared into the sky. Sometime later, an inspection team from Cyan's clan discovered him near the river, battered but alive. They escorted him back to safety, and his survival against the odds earned him the nickname the boy who survived the Devil Dragon. The group returned to an abbey near the borders of Velius, which had been repurposed as a military hospital. When Cyan awoke, he found Arin sitting by his side. Before he could process the situation, Arin hesitantly began to speak, her face flushed. She seemed to struggle with her words, and Cyan suspected she intended to ask him something significant. Finally, she asked if he would be hers, though her phrasing was vague and confusing. Cyan stared at her in bewilderment, unsure of her meaning. Internally, he questioned her motives, growing frustrated. Arin, failing to realize how unclear her words had been, began to cry. She lamented her incompetence, berating herself as a useless princess who could not handle the weight of her responsibilities and taking the boy's silence as refusal. Cyan, already irritated, thought about her self-pitying behavior and its connection to the tragic end he knew awaited her. Frustrated by her inability to act decisively, he spoke bluntly. He told her that in her current state, she was of no use to him or anyone else. Without influence, etiquette, or purpose, she was more of a liability than an asset. Cyan's words struck deeply, wounding the vulnerable princess. However, he added a statement that softened the blow, telling her that he would watch over her from afar until she developed into someone better. This unexpected remark deeply moved Arin, prompting her to ask what he meant by watching her. Trying to remain indifferent, Cyan replied that she shouldn't be disappointed. Arin, her emotions swirling, composed herself and replied with determination that she understood. She confidently declared that she would improve until she gained his acknowledgement. Smiling, she pointed at Cyan and vowed that one day she would become so powerful that he wouldn't be able to ignore her. Cyan, surprised by her sudden confidence, responded that he looked forward to it, though inwardly he found her quick change and demeanor perplexing, thinking she was still just a child. As Arin prepared to leave, she turned back with flushed cheeks, adding one more thing. She thanked him for being alive. Cyan, dumbfounded, struggled to grasp her intentions. The scene shifted to another location, the outskirts of the rear camp, deep within a snowy forest. A cloaked man moved cautiously through the snow until he reached a tree stump. After ensuring no one was watching, he retrieved a brightly colored cube, his face lighting up with joy as he muttered that there wasn't much left to accomplish. Suddenly, a voice startled him, stating his name, Reynold Crimson. At the sound of the voice, Reynold froze in place, his body bound by an invisible force. He struggled to move, realizing he was completely immobilized. Behind him stood Cyan, smirking faintly. Cyan calmly identified the cube as a small dimensional box, remarking that its commercialization hadn't yet occurred. It was an artifact capable of infinite storage, powered by immense mana. Cyan stepped closer, disguised as the cloaked man, while Reynold glared but powerless. Cyan explained that this artifact was a masterpiece of the Kieram Kingdom's Mage Association, one he had been tracking for a year due to suspicions of smuggling within the Empire. Without hesitation, Cyan seized the cube from Reynold's hand, commenting on how Reynold had been using it for his illegal operations. Cyan proceeded to read Reynold's personal details aloud, revealing him to be a 7-star sorcerer knight from the Kieram kingdom. Reynold, shocked by Cyan's knowledge, grew even more alarmed when Cyan removed his hood, revealing his identity as Cyan Vert. Reynold began to wonder how Cyan had tracked him. Inspecting the cube's contents, Cyan revealed parts of demonic beasts, remarking that Reynold had been extracting their blood and smuggling it across the border in supply carriages. Cyan also deduced there was a spy in the Empire's supply department aiding the operation. Reynold immediately denied the accusations, claiming ignorance, but Cyan remained composed. He pointed out that the blood was already being sold on the black market. Reynold, recalling a transaction involving Hellhound Blood and Alice, began suspecting her betrayal. Regardless, he knew he couldn't let Cyan leave. Cyan continued his investigation, dismissively noting the beast parts as too large to consume, and wondered aloud how Reynold had managed to operate so boldly. As Reynold regained some control over his body, he smiled darkly and broke free of Cyan's restraining magic. With a crazed laugh, he cast a spell, Breath Fire, directing magical flames towards Cyan in an attempt to kill him. Reynold sneered, claiming that Cyan's carelessness would now cost him his life. The flames engulfed Cyan, and Reynold momentarily thought he was finished. The rumors about Cyan's strength, it seemed, were true. The fire spread, and Reynold, speaking smugly, lamented the loss of the dimensional box during transport, but remained confident in his victory. However, before Reynold could celebrate, his hand was severed in an instant. Reeling in pain and confusion, Reynold cried out as blood poured from his wound. He looked around frantically, noticing a strange black fog surrounding him. Before he could process what was happening, Cyan reappeared, alive and unscathed, and rushed toward him with terrifying speed. Cyan grabbed Reynold by the neck and pressed him against a tree, his aura radiating fury. With a menacing tone, Cyan demanded that Reynold reveal the smuggling routes and the identity of the spy. He warned that failure to comply would result in a death so horrifying that even Satan would pray for mercy on Reynold's behalf. The scene shifted to a bustling trading post on the western border of Velius. Merchants were fervently trading goods when two men opened a crate for inspection. As they lifted the lid, they froze in horror. Inside, they found the dismembered body parts of a smuggler dealt with by Cyan. The man's severed head lay among the blood-soaked remains, serving as a grim warning to anyone daring to follow in his footsteps. Cyan stood above and observed while Kieram questioned whether any action would be taken against the group nearby. Cyan responded with a calm assurance that the warning issued would suffice. The situation involving Reynold Crimson, a 7-star sorcerer knight from the Kieram kingdom. He had been smuggling demonic beast blood from the front lines without the Empire's knowledge. These contraband items were being delivered to the Kieram Kingdom's Mage Association. That was a place where mages, driven by an obsessive passion for magic, gathered to delve into the origins and foundations of their craft, while also experimenting with the creation of new forms of magic. They aspired to transcend the limits of humanity itself. Currently, their efforts were directed toward practical innovations like the Dimension Box, but Cyan warned of the catastrophic implications of their future experiments with demonic beast blood. Resolving to put an end to their schemes, Cyan prepared to leave. Kieram, in a teasing manner, remarked on Cyan's apparent shift in purpose, suggesting it resembled a change in class from assassin to problem solver. Irritated, Cyan dismissed the comment and asked Kieram to stop talking. Undeterred, Kieram questioned whether the decision to interfere was selfless, noting it seemed contrary to Cyan's claim of living for personal goals. Cyan, however, replied with firm conviction, explaining that preventing the misuse of demonic beast blood was a personal matter, not an altruistic endeavor. The scene shifted to a residence in the Wusif Empire, where Echelle, Cyan's older brother, stood by a window, reading a letter. The content mentioned Cyan, and Echelle mused aloud about Cyan being on the front lines with their father. A lady, sitting on the bed, curiously asked about Cyan, referring to him as Echelle's half-brother. Echelle, with evident irritation, confirmed and admitted that Cyan was becoming a nuisance. Resolving to confront him, Echelle decided to give him a visit. Meanwhile, Cyan was preparing to leave the battlefield. Emily expressed excitement about finally departing the front lines and speculated enthusiastically about the academy they were headed to, expecting it to be a far cry from their current grim environment. Cyan, however, viewed the academy differently, describing it as a harsh environment dominated by politics, envy, and competition over education. Despite his warning, Emily's excitement remained unshaken, as she chattered about the prospect of handsome instructors and the possibility of romance. Cyan wondered silently about her priorities and whether her enthusiasm was really about the academy. After a long journey home, Cyan stepped down from the carriage, taking in his surroundings. Unexpectedly, he encountered his half-brother, Krantz, who appeared strangely terrified upon seeing him. As Cyan attempted a casual greeting, Krantz fled in fear, leaving him puzzled. Kieram, observing the encounter, questioned who the stranger was. Cyan explained it was his half-brother and dismissed the interaction as unimportant. Kieram, however, laughed, noting the stark contrast between Cyan and his family. Cyan denied the observation, though he privately acknowledged someone else as the true opposite. Upon arriving at his family's residence, Cyan was surprised to find the servants lined up respectfully to welcome him back. This unusual display of courtesy puzzled him, as the servants had always ignored him in the past. He suspected their sudden politeness was due to the presence of his father or someone of equal authority. Reflecting on the changes that had occurred over the past year, Cyan considered this a testament to his own efforts. As Cyan approached his room, a sinister aura emanating from within caught his attention. Recognizing the presence, he steeled himself before entering. Inside, Echelle stood, his expression twisted into a disturbing grin. Echelle greeted Cyan casually, remarking on the time that had passed since they last saw one another. Cyan's shock and anger were palpable as he tried to maintain composure. Echelle continued, expressing mock concern over whether Cyan remembered him. However, Cyan found it difficult to focus, his thoughts consumed by the overwhelming urge to kill. As he reached for his demonic sword, Kieram materialized beside him, urging restraint. She reminded him that attacking Echelle impulsively would be unwise. Though infuriated, Cyan managed to suppress his rage and instead bowed, addressing Echelle as his older brother. Echelle, seemingly pleased, patted Cyan's head and expressed satisfaction at being remembered. Though this action incensed Cyan further, he forced himself to remain calm. Echelle then commented on Cyan's improved swordsmanship and expressed expectations that Cyan would soon prove useful on the battlefield. Despite his growing resentment, Cyan maintained a serious demeanor and replied that he looked forward to it as well. Echelle, appearing slightly skeptical, noted Cyan's response, but concluded by stating his pleasure at visiting. Inwardly, Cyan assessed Echelle's intentions. Knowing his older brother's habit of disregarding those deemed insignificant, Cyan recognized that Echelle's presence had a purpose. Strangely, this realization helped Cyan regain his composure. Cyan forced a peculiar smile, his expression strained, and acknowledged that he had missed him as well. Meanwhile, in the corridor, Emily wrestled with two heavy suitcases, her displeasure evident. She muttered complaints under her breath, remarking on how Cyan didn't even have any luggage and could have easily helped her. Frustration crept into her actions as she opened the door and immediately directed her anger at Cyan, questioning his behavior. However, upon noticing Echelle's presence in the room, she fell silent, her words abruptly halting in surprise. Echelle appeared calm and approachable, offering a smile as he observed Emily. He mentioned that he had heard of her closeness to Cyan and assured her to continue her work without hesitation. His tone was courteous, implying that she needn't feel uncomfortable. After delivering his statement, Echelle exited the room, prompting both Cyan and Emily to bow respectfully in farewell. As the door closed, Emily let out a sigh of relief and confessed her nervousness. Her demeanor quickly shifted to irritation as she directed a sharp look at Cyan, expressing her frustration at not being informed earlier of the first young master's arrival. Cyan, visibly uneasy, interrupted her complaint with a pointed tone, requesting to be left alone for a while. Emily, unaware of his troubled mood, attempted to protest but stopped short when she caught sight of his intimidating glare. He repeated his demand firmly, leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, she complied, though she was perplexed by this unfamiliar side of him. Once alone, Cyan felt overwhelmed. He retreated to the bathroom, where the intensity of his emotions caused him to vomit. When he finally emerged, his demeanor had shifted, appearing slightly more composed. Turning his attention inward, he addressed Kieram, questioning why she had intervened earlier. Kieram, her tone mocking, replied that Cyan should actually be grateful. Cyan retorted, accusing Kieram of seeking opportunities to take control of his body. Kieram's response carried a sinister undertone as she clarified that her intent was merely to fuel Cyan's anger, savoring the emotional turmoil it would create. Amused by this revelation, Cyan laughed, acknowledging the dark honesty in Kieram's words. The scene then transitioned to Echelle's location, where he summoned a servant. The servant promptly provided an update, stating that the second young lady had been located in the northern territory of the White Elves, Farina. Echelle mused over the reputation of the White Elves, who were known for their disdain toward outsiders. He remarked on her ability to navigate such challenging environments and instructed the servant to monitor her movements closely, especially if there were signs of her return. The servant agreed to the task, noting Echelle's seemingly brighter mood and curiously inquired if the meeting with his younger brother had been enjoyable. Echelle responded with a laugh, acknowledging that it could be described as amusing, though his expression quickly turned foreboding. Correcting the servant, he admitted to being in a foul mood. Echelle's thoughts lingered on Cyan's expression during their encounter, noting the intensity in his younger brother's eyes. It felt as though Cyan viewed him as a lifelong nemesis. He questioned whether this perception was merely his imagination, but resolved to keep a close watch on him regardless. The servant assured Echelle of his dedication to the task, while Echelle, lost in thought, contemplated the enigmatic nature of Cyan's gaze, wondering what secrets he might be hiding. The scene shifted to a carriage waiting outside the mansion, with Emily standing nearby. Her displeasure was evident as she confronted Cyan, voicing her disappointment in his actions. Cyan attempted to justify his situation, explaining that he was only allowed to take a knight escort to the academy. However, Emily grew more irate, chastising him for not informing her sooner. The argument escalated briefly before it was time for Cyan to leave. He bid her farewell, urging her to behave in his absence. Emily, feigning indifference, returned the sentiment with a playful remark. As the carriage began its journey, Emily shouted after him, her voice tinged with emotion, urging him not to let himself be discouraged even if he faced difficulties. Her words caused Cyan to glance back, his face betraying a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. He reflected on a childhood memory, recalling a time when he had been gravely ill. At the age of 8, during a torrential rainstorm, Emily had carried his feverish body to seek help. Despite being only a servant, she had run through the streets tirelessly until a kind old man offered them shelter and assistance. Back in the present, Cyan recognized that while their interactions were often contentious, their bond was akin to family. With a rare smile, he called out from the carriage, teasing Emily to behave or face his wrath. Emily, delighted by his light-hearted tone, pretended not to hear, though her expression betrayed her happiness. To Cyan, Emily was far more than just a servant. She was someone deeply significant in his life. As the carriage moved farther away, Cyan sat in silence, his expression growing pensive. He noted with unease the presence of 6 intermediate-class knights assigned to escort him. The disproportionate security puzzled him, prompting a weary sigh. Finally, he muttered with a wry smile, suggesting to himself that trouble was likely brewing before he even reached the academy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the carriage slowed, and 2 knights exchanged subtle signals, indicating a hidden plan. Inside the carriage, Cyan lay calmly, seemingly aware of everything unfolding around him. A knight approached and suggested that they camp for the night. In response, Cyan asked where they were. The knight informed him that they were near the central city of Saffron and assured him they would arrive in the city by morning. Cyan agreed and instructed the knight to inform him once the campsite was ready. The knight acknowledged the order with deference. Observing the surroundings, Cyan immediately recognized the knight's lie. He noted that there wasn't a forest like this near Saffron, nor was it a place with any notable shade or landmarks. The area, remote and isolated, was far from any central city. Internally, Cyan confirmed his suspicion, realizing the knight's true intentions. Moments later, another knight called to Cyan, requesting him to step out of the carriage. Cyan complied, feigning ignorance, and commented on how refreshing the air was. As he exited, the knights surrounded him. Noticing what he intended to do, Cyan inquired about the mastermind's identity. The man with brown hair hesitated, appearing anxious, while the other knights remained silent, their unease evident. One of them finally smirked, prompting Cyan to fix him with a menacing gaze and repeat his question. The knight with the smirk, now holding his sword, dismissed Cyan's inquiry, stating that it didn't matter since he would be dead soon. Another knight expressed regret over the situation, remarking that there were no personal feelings involved. A third knight added that he would try to make Cyan's death painless, instructing him to close his eyes and accept his fate. As the smirking knight lunged forward to attack, Cyan remained calm. In a flash, the knight's body fell to the ground in pieces, his head severed cleanly. The other knights froze in shock, their faces pale with terror. Cyan, now exuding a chilling bloodlust, brandished his sword and demanded to know who was behind the ambush. The knights, paralyzed by fear, failed to respond. Cyan's voice turned cold as he taunted them, questioning why they seemed unprepared for this outcome. The brown-haired stood frozen, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. Summoning his courage, one knight charged at Cyan in a desperate bid for survival. However, his attempt was futile. Mere moments later, his head was severed. With swift and calculated strikes, Cyan unleashed a barrage of attacks on the remaining knights, each blow finding its mark. One knight, too frightened to fight, attempted to flee, but was swiftly cut down by Cyan's dagger that hurled toward his back. The man in the brown-haired, now the sole survivor, tears streamed down his face as he stammered in disbelief, questioning how an 11-year-old could be so fearsome. Cyan's reputation as someone who had survived a battle with a dragon suddenly seemed all too credible. As Cyan approached, his menacing gaze fixed on the man, he demanded a confession. Overwhelmed with fear, the man revealed that Mrs. Margaret had orchestrated the ambush. Cyan, finding the answer almost too convenient, expressed mild disappointment, but listened as the man continued to sob and tremble. Later, the carriage resumed its journey with the man at the reins and Cyan seated on top. The man elaborated further, explaining that the mission stemmed from a favor Mr. Krantz had requested from Mrs. Margaret. Cyan, surprised by this revelation, recalled how Krantz had fled at the mere sight of him. Internally, he resolved to teach Krantz a lesson when their paths crossed again. The man, still trembling, asked Cyan about his fate, wondering if he would be killed. Cyan dismissed the question, remarking that the man didn't seem particularly upset about the possibility. The man confessed that since they had been the ones to attack first, he had no right to resent being killed in return. Cyan ignored the sentiment, instructing the man to focus on driving. He added that there was a difference between being useless and having no value, and acknowledged the man's skill in handling the carriage. Surprised, the man thanked him. As the majestic city of Saffron came into view, Cyan announced their arrival. The scene shifted to a luxurious room where a shattered vase lay on the floor. A woman's furious voice demanded an explanation as she trembling in anger. Her butler confirmed that of the knights sent to attack Cyan, 6 were dead and 1 was missing. He added that the young master had left Saffron 10 days ago. Margaret, shocked and enraged, exclaimed that she had been assured there would be no problems. The butler bowed apologetically, admitting they had underestimated Cyan. Furious, Margaret berated him for being unable to eliminate a mere child. Attempting to justify himself, the butler suggested that someone unknown might have intervened on Cyan's behalf and proposed sending someone to the academy. However, Margaret, growing increasingly anxious, cut him off sharply. She reminded him of the consequences should Cyan retaliate, especially if Krantz were harmed. The memory of Cyan's terrifying demeanor and past threats caused her voice to falter with fear. The thought of what Cyan might do made Margaret resolve to abandon any further attempts, her anxiety visibly consuming her. Margaret, her face still tense, turned sharply to the butler and ordered him to stand down, forbidding any further action. Her voice carried a tone of finality as she added that no one must ever know about the incident. The butler bowed obediently, silently acknowledging her instructions before leaving the room. However, his movements caught the attention of Echelle's servant, who observed him carefully. The scene then shifted to Cyan, lounging comfortably in the back of a horse-drawn carriage. His thoughts drifted as he noted it had been 10 days since their departure. Sir Brian had been acting as his subordinate the entire time, and Cyan surmised that word of his survival had likely spread by now. With the Royal Academy drawing near, Cyan contemplated his next move regarding Brian. Interrupting his thoughts, Brian opened the carriage window and announced their arrival. Cyan, still half asleep, opened his eyes and acknowledged the information. As the Academy complex came into view, Cyan's mind wandered to the past. He reflected on his time there, remarking internally that while the memories weren't particularly pleasant, the Academy had shaped him in significant ways. Arriving at the reception desk, Cyan presented his family crest and introduced himself as Cyan Vert of the Duke Vert family. The staff member at the desk froze momentarily, visibly startled by the prestigious name, before quickly regaining composure. She welcomed Cyan with a smile, confirming his registration and instructing him to proceed to his assigned dormitory. She also informed him of the upcoming entrance ceremony and elemental test scheduled for 2 days later. Cyan's surprise grew when he learned he had been assigned a private room, something unprecedented for his family. He questioned whether there had been a mistake, but the staff member simply handed him a tray containing his belongings, a key, and a letter, avoiding further explanation. Still skeptical, Cyan accepted the items and made his way to the dormitory with Brian. When they entered the room, Brian, overwhelmed by the grandeur of their accommodations, dropped the luggage abruptly. His expression betrayed shock as he stood speechless. Cyan took a moment to examine the luxurious surroundings and quietly remarked on the significance of being placed in the royal hall, noting that no one from his family had ever received such an honor. Convinced that someone influential must be behind this, Cyan turned to Brian for confirmation about the luggage. Brian, still shaken, confirmed that everything had been delivered. Cyan then reached into his coat, retrieving something as he casually remarked that Brian's role had been completed now that they had safely arrived at the academy. Brian, misunderstanding Cyan's intent, began trembling and begged for mercy, fearing the worst. To his astonishment, Cyan tossed him a bag of gold coins instead. Brian, bewildered, tried to comprehend the gesture. Cyan turned toward the window, waving his hand dismissively, and explained that the gold was payment for his service. He added that it would be enough for Brian to start a new life elsewhere, but warned him not to return to Velias if he valued his safety. Despite the warning, Cyan clarified that he wouldn't stop him from doing so. Hearing these words, Brian's expression grew solemn. After a moment of hesitation, he dropped to one knee and solemnly declared his intent to serve Cyan for life. Introducing himself formally as Brian Kendrick, a knight of Velias, he requested permission to remain in Cyan's service. Cyan, visibly surprised, remarked on Brian's true identity, admitting he had mistaken him for a mere coachman. Brian confessed that he was a low-ranking knight, often assigned to menial duties. He explained that his father had advised him to serve someone trustworthy without hesitation if he ever encountered such a person. Cyan's expression turned serious, his aura growing more imposing. He questioned Brian's loyalty, asking how he could trust that Cyan wouldn't betray him in the future. Despite his fear, Brian responded resolutely, stating that it wouldn't matter even if Cyan did. Satisfied with Brian's unwavering resolve, Cyan patted him on the shoulder and acknowledged his loyalty. With a dismissive tone, Cyan stated that he had no intention of attending the entrance ceremony and instructed Brian to prepare for the elemental test instead. Brian complied, addressing Cyan as young master, while still processing everything that had transpired. Meanwhile, in the dean's office at the Royal Academy, Colonel Quizel reviewed the year's student intake. Stroking his beard thoughtfully, he noted that several talented individuals would participate in the elemental test. Among them were Princess Arin Sevelus, who possessed 2-star mana control abilities, AB rank in physical aptitude, and 52% purity in the light attribute. Another notable name was Seth Chaharkin, who boasted 3-star mana control abilities, an A rank in physical aptitude, and 71% purity in the sand attribute. However, what caught the dean's attention most was Cyan Vert reviewing Cyan's statistics. He noted the stark contrast: a 1-star mana control ability paired with S-ranked physical aptitude and a remarkable 92% purity in the dark attribute. The instructor present, a woman named Serrika Nigrithie, pointed out that even Alice Vert, the so-called God's child, had only achieved 88% purity in the water attribute upon graduation. The dean mused over the implications of Cyan's talents. He found it fascinating that the younger sibling of a prodigy might surpass their elder sibling in potential. With an intrigued expression, he acknowledged that Cyan Vert was a subject worth monitoring closely. Serrika expressed concern about Cyan's dark attribute, remarking that talents aligned with darkness often had the potential to stagnate or rot. The dean then asked if Serrika was aware that Cyan Vert had been assigned to the royal hall. She replied affirmatively, explaining that other instructors had informed her. The dean elaborated, revealing that it was an order from the emperor himself. This revelation left Serrika stunned. The dean continued, explaining that Cyan had saved the young princess from monsters on the front lines, and there were even rumors that the emperor was considering marrying the fifth princess, previously regarded as a failure, to Cyan. The union between the princess and the illustrious Vert family, known for producing exceptional talents, would undoubtedly cause significant ripple effects. Serrika speculated on the consequences, predicting that conflicts over imperial succession could intensify and potentially lead to a civil war. The dean cautioned her not to overthink the situation, stating that their role was merely to observe. He mused aloud, wondering whether Cyan would ultimately rise as the empire's hero or bring about its downfall. Meanwhile, after completing his examination, Cyan walked through the academy corridors, reflecting on his test results. His dark attribute purity had reached an impressive 92%, prompting him to ponder whether this was higher than in his past life. He speculated that his unusually high score might be attributed to consuming the blood of demonic beasts. As Cyan turned a corner, he encountered Krantz. Greeting him in a seemingly casual manner, Cyan noted Krantz's visible fear. Cyan privately thought about how shocking it must be for Krantz to see someone he believed to be dead. Standing beside Krantz was a tall young man who exuded hostility. This individual, with a mocking tone, asked Krantz if Cyan was the boy he treated like a servant. Krantz, stammering, nervously introduced Cyan. The young man, whom Cyan recognized as Pauper Penneron, the son of Marquis Penneron of the Kieram kingdom, sneered and insulted Cyan, commenting on his unknown parentage. Memories of Pauper's bullying from Cyan's past life surfaced, prompting Cyan to smirk wickedly. He thought to himself how fortunate he was to meet Pauper again under these circumstances. Unaware of the brewing tension, Pauper urged Krantz to move aside, suggesting that Cyan deserved a beating. Krantz, sensing the imminent confrontation, tried to defuse the situation by suggesting they head to the cafeteria instead. However, before anything could be resolved, Cyan lunged forward and delivered a powerful kick to Pauper, sending him crashing into the wall, which cracked under the impact. Krantz shouted Pauper's name in shock as the unconscious boy slumped to the floor. Cyan then turned to Krantz, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Krantz, trembling and tearing up, could only stammer apologies. Leaning in, Cyan whispered a chilling threat into Krantz's ear, warning that while he was lenient about actions taken behind his back, any future encounter would result in Krantz graduating in a wheelchair. The fear in Krantz's eyes was unmistakable as Cyan left him paralyzed with terror. As Cyan walked away, a sinister smile crept across his face. He thought to himself that life at the academy was shaping up to be quite entertaining. Elsewhere, in the Royal Academy's library, an instructor named Serrika roamed the shelves while contemplating Cyan. She wondered whether he would emerge as the hero of the Empire or its greatest downfall. Moving toward the spot where a particular book should have been, she discovered it missing and frowned, puzzled by its disappearance. Suddenly, Cyan appeared behind her, startling her. He held the missing book in his hand and casually asked if she was looking for it. Serrika tried to maintain her composure, forcing a smile as she questioned how a student had gained access to a restricted area. Inwardly, however, she was alarmed, realizing she hadn't detected his presence at all. Feigning ignorance, Serrika addressed Cyan formally, asking if he was Mr. Cyan Vert and politely requesting the book for her research. Cyan, with a friendly expression, handed her something resembling a letter instead of the book. Serrika began to thank him when, suddenly, a sharp weapon was launched in Cyan's direction. Though the attack caught him off guard, it struck the book rather than Cyan himself. Cyan, now on high alert, asked Serrika if that wasn't what she was looking for. His tone turned sharp as he accused her of belonging to the Mist, a notorious assassin organization. Serrika's expression hardened. Her true identity revealed as she held the letter hidden within the book and demanded to know how Cyan had discovered her secret. Cyan recounted his past life, recalling how he had initially found Serrika's demeanor unremarkable. She had presented herself as a kind and friendly instructor, frequently engaging him in conversations about his growth and his challenges as someone bullied by his brother. At the time, her interest in him had seemed almost comical. Interrupting his thoughts, Serrika expressed her fascination with Cyan, remarking on the rarity of his dark attribute purity, which he believed to be around 84%. This caught Cyan off guard, though he remained focused on the dangerous game now unfolding between them. Cyan, with a hesitant expression, remarked that he had been told his element wasn't particularly special. Serrika, maintaining her calm demeanor, responded with words of encouragement, pointing out that humanity's understanding of the darkness element was still limited. She added that she believed his growth potential was infinite. Cyan, briefly caught off guard, found himself entertaining the thought that this instructor might genuinely want to help him. However, that momentary trust quickly dissipated as Cyan's sharp instincts kicked in. Internally, he reminded himself that this was all a misunderstanding. He was being deceived. Serrika's innocent appearance was nothing more than a mask. Cyan's mind raced as he analyzed the situation. Serrika wasn't just an instructor. She was an assassin. Not only that, but she was the Hall Master of Mist, a shadowy organization notorious for its covert operations. And now, she was hiding within the Academy, a place teeming with nobles and royals from across the continent. Serrika, now composed, suggested with a seemingly harmless tone that Cyan join her in her laboratory. Her unbothered demeanor caught Cyan by surprise, as it wasn't the reaction he had anticipated. The two soon found themselves in Serrika's laboratory, a space crowded with peculiar objects and tools. As Cyan surveyed the room, he noted that it hadn't changed from what he remembered. Sitting down, he casually sipped the tea offered to him. With a sudden, bright smile, Cyan commented that she had poisoned the tea. Serrika, unfazed, returned his smile and confirmed it cheerfully, stating it wasn't a severe poison and would only melt his organs. Cyan remained calm, thinking to himself that the poison wouldn't affect him, as he had built immunity from years of consuming demonic beast blood, and of course from Emily's less-than-edible cooking. Changing his demeanor to match the gravity of the situation, Cyan looked Serrika in the eye and suggested that she use something stronger next time. The atmosphere shifted as Serrika abandoned any pretense of friendliness. She leaned forward and suggested they have a proper conversation, asking Cyan how he had discovered her true identity. She also demanded to know how he was aware of her orders being hidden in the obscure book in the library. Her suspicion deepened as she speculated whether Cyan was a part of Mist himself. Calmly, Cyan asked what more proof she needed. Unnerved, Serrika scoffed, accusing Cyan of being overconfident after his recent elemental test results. Cyan ignored her remark and began recounting the events before his arrival at Chatran, where others had questioned why he only had one escort knight and a coachman for protection. He highlighted the recent string of noble assassinations and then asked Serrika directly when the purification project had begun. Feigning ignorance, Serrika questioned what he meant by purification project. However, her growing hostility betrayed her true feelings. Cyan clarified that he was referring to the assassinations and confronted her directly. Serrika, now with a cold and threatening tone, warned him that he might regret his words. Unbothered, Cyan pressed her further, asking if she was threatening a student. The confrontation escalated as Serrika flipped the table between them, attempting to obstruct Cyan's view. Cyan, unfazed, smashed the table in half with a single punch. Serrika, demonstrating her assassin skills, moved to the ceiling, armed with 2 daggers. From above, she lunged at Cyan, declaring that if he were truly a part of Mist, she would have known about him. With incredible speed, she unleashed 2 strikes aimed directly at Cyan. However, Cyan managed to evade them just in time. Serrika's excitement grew as she taunted him, refusing to let him escape. Cyan, now visibly irritated, drew Kieram's blade form, its dark energy pulsating in his hand. In a calm but serious tone, he stated that he had no choice but to fight back. Changing his grip on Kieram, Cyan rushed toward her, stating that if she couldn't trust his words, he would prove himself through action. His relentless assault from multiple angles overwhelmed her defenses, forcing her to call for a halt. Breathing heavily, Serrika's eyes widened as she recognized the weapon Cyan wielded. Staring at the dagger, she stammered, questioning whether it was the demonic sword Kieram a legendary weapon said to be wielded only by someone chosen by Aeru. Cyan, holding Kieram firmly, asked coldly if she believed him now. He then added that Mist must currently be searching for its successor. Serrika, bewildered, demanded to know how Cyan was aware of this. With a chilling calmness, Cyan revealed that the successor Mist sought was standing right in front of her. He instructed Serrika to bring him to Aeru, leaving her visibly shaken by the command. The scene shifted to a dark and desolate street in Lewin, the area illuminated only by faint moonlight. Serrika led Cyan to a concealed door, using magic to unlock it. As the door opened, a dense, eerie mist poured out, carrying an air of foreboding. Serrika motioned toward the doorway and informed Cyan that this was the path to the altar he sought. She added that he was on his own from this point forward. Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Cyan to venture into the darkness alone. Cyan surveyed his surroundings, quickly deducing the nature of the strange realm he was in. He noted that this was a unique space, expanded using the power of the god of darkness. From the outside, the area seemed far smaller than it actually was. As Cyan analyzed the terrain, he sensed ambushers lying in wait. He calmly assessed their positions, identifying 2 at one direction and 3 at another. Moments later, daggers flew toward him, but Cyan had anticipated the attack and effortlessly blocked every projectile. However, the thrown daggers were merely distractions. 2 masked assassins emerged from behind and moved in to strike. Cyan remained calm, thinking to himself that while he had predicted such a maneuver, this elaborate welcome ceremony was excessive. As the assassins lunged, Cyan skillfully dodged, stepping back with measured strike. The speed of the assassins' attacks was astounding, their movements appearing as flashes of red light. They threw a barrage of concealed weapons at Cyan, who blocked each one without faltering. Cyan retaliated by throwing their own daggers back at them, nearly hitting one assassin's face. However, the assassins skillfully deflected the projectiles, demonstrating impressive technique. Cyan briefly admired their abilities, thinking how remarkable it was that they managed to deflect his counterattacks in such a short window of time. But the respite was brief as all the assassins converged on him, activating their secret technique, expansion, and forming the deadly Deathhorn formation. Cyan found himself surrounded, with attacks coming from all 4 directions simultaneously. Despite the situation, Cyan remained unfazed. He had already analyzed their techniques, and in response, activated his own secret technique, expansion. A red aura enveloped his body, radiating outward with a menacing intensity. The assassins froze in shock, realizing that Cyan, a mere child, was using their exclusive technique. Their astonishment grew as Cyan unleashed Bloodthirst Wave, a skill that converted bloodlust into a physical wave of energy. As the wave surged outward, it engulfed the assassins, constricting their movements and making it impossible for them to breathe. One by one, the assassins collapsed unconscious, their bodies overwhelmed by the force of the technique. Cyan observed the aftermath and confirmed that none of them would be getting up anytime soon. However, Cyan's focus shifted to a final assassin who had yet to act. This figure had been silently watching from a distance, exuding an air of authority. Cyan suspected this individual was a higher-ranking operative. To prepare for any surprises, Cyan activated Mist Sword, unshakable roots of a great tree, channeling power into the demonic blade, Kieram. Before Cyan could execute the skill, the assassin launched a swift and powerful attack, interrupting his technique mid-action. Cyan staggered momentarily, surprised by the assassin's strength. His thoughts raced as he questioned the identity of someone capable of halting him so effortlessly. As the mask of the final assassin slipped off, Cyan's eyes widened in shock. Standing before him was none other than Serrika, the Hall Master herself. Serrika's expression twisted into a deranged smile, her cheeks flushed red. In an obsessive tone, she demanded that Cyan reveal his true power. Without hesitation, Cyan activated Thick Mist 8th Form, Assault. The skill unleashed 8 slashes within a single second, forcing Serrika to retreat. The ferocity of the attack even severed the hair tie that bound her hair, causing her long, smooth locks to cascade freely. Serrika, unbothered by the setback, looked delighted as she complimented Cyan's proficiency with both the thick mist technique and the mist sword. Her excitement only seemed to grow as she insisted he reveal his full potential. Before Serrika could finish her sentence, Cyan turned and fled, unwilling to continue the confrontation. Serrika's excitement turned into relentless pursuit as she activated zeal for combat. Cyan, now running for his life, couldn't help but feel the weight of his predicament. He realized that Serrika, as a hall master, was driven by an insatiable desire for combat, a fixation that would only end with one of them dead. As Cyan's apprehension grew, Serrika used her skill to climb the walls, quickly closing the distance between them. Her expression was a mix of madness and delight, her flushed cheeks and maniacal smile making her appear more like a demon than a human. Her voice echoed in the eerie space as she called out to Cyan, taunting him and asking if this wasn't exactly what he wanted. Serrika activated Mist Sword, rushing Mist Storm, unleashing slashes that blocked all of Cyan's escape routes. Pushed back, Cyan defended himself as best as he could, muttering under his breath that he wasn't nearly as deranged as her. Amid the chaos, Serrika informed him that the realm they were in was created by Aeru, the god of darkness. She explained that no energy or activity within the space could be detected by the outside world. Her words carried a terrifying implication. There would be no interruptions, no escape, and no consequences from the outside. Upon hearing the situation, Cyan made a decision. In a place like this, where all techniques could be utilized, he acknowledged the risk of killing his opponent but dismissed the concern. In the next moment, Cyan's entire body underwent a transformation. A red aura surrounded him, and his eyes turned crimson, signaling his fusion with Kieram. Suddenly, Cyan's behavior changed dramatically. His body froze, and without warning, he collapsed face-first onto the ground, unconscious. Serrika, witnessing this, was taken by surprise and struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. As confusion clouded her mind, Kieram's voice echoed, expressing confidence and remarking that Cyan could rest. Immediately afterward, a dark energy coalesced, materializing Kieram's physical form. Serrika, still unsure of the woman's identity, recoiled in shock as Kieram's voice turned threatening. Kieram admitted reluctance in intervening and questioned Serrika's actions. Recognizing her, Serrika knelt out of respect and addressed her by name. Demonic Sword Kieram. Visibly angered, Kieram demanded an explanation for Serrika's actions, accusing her of attacking Cyan despite worshipping Aeru. In defense, Serrika clarified that her actions were meant to verify Cyan's legitimacy as the successor. Dissatisfied with this reasoning, Kieram unleashed a powerful aura and stated that Serrika could have called upon her god instead. Kieram interpreted Serrika's actions as a direct challenge and voiced this interpretation with evident hostility. Serrika, hesitant to engage further, offered an awkward smile and redirected Kieram's attention to Cyan. Puzzled, Kieram glanced at Cyan and noticed him lying in a pool of blood. Alarmed, she exclaimed in frustration, questioning why he was dying. Serrika explained the inefficiency of manifesting one's entire form, noting that it consumed the owner's life force. Furious at this revelation, Kieram grabbed Cyan by the collar and chastised him for the reckless use of his abilities, referencing the beast blood he had consumed. Serrika, however, intervened, asserting her readiness for battle and expressing that she never turned down a challenge, especially one from Kieram. Kieram, disturbed by Serrika's enthusiasm, reflected internally on the absurdity of the situation and admitted to feeling uneasy. At that moment, Cyan regained consciousness and, exhausted, demanded Kieram release him. Once freed, Cyan questioned Kieram's sudden manifestation. Kieram, smiling mischievously, instructed him to stay behind her, claiming it was time to teach Serrika a lesson. Serrika, delighted by the challenge, prepared herself and expressed the honor of fighting Kieram. In response, Kieram warned her not to beg for mercy later. Serrika, undeterred, provocatively replied that she hoped Kieram could push her to that point. Before the conflict could escalate further, a whisper interrupted Serrika. Recognizing the voice as Aeru's, she froze. A blue portal appeared, capturing the attention of both Kieram and Cyan. From the portal came a command, instructing Serrika to send Cyan to the altar. Serrika, showing respect, agreed without hesitation. Observing the unfolding events, Cyan felt a sense of relief, quietly expressing his anticipation of finally meeting Aeru, the god of darkness. Within Cyan's mind, memories of the past resurfaced. He recalled how people described the god of black mist as evil, claiming that this god justified killing without hesitation. The god, in response, had stated that such acts were driven by the desires of others, emphasizing the importance of individual ethics over external judgment. Though many would deem this logic insane, Cyan recognized the god's intent to protect the weak. Despite this understanding, Cyan considered the god an idealistic fool. Returning to the present, Cyan and Kieram, with Aeru's permission, stepped into the abyss portal. Ahead of them lay an endless staircase ascending to a throne. Atop the throne sat a figure clad in the familiar hooded cloak of assassins. As they approached, the figure addressed Cyan, asking if he knew his identity. Cyan, maintaining a calm demeanor, confirmed the man as Aeru, the god of darkness. Aeru, seeking further confirmation, inquired about Cyan's name and the evidence supporting his claim as the successor. Cyan, confident, pointed out the presence of the power of darkness within him. Satisfied by this response, Aeru refrained from questioning further. Aeru explained the two paths to becoming the successor, one where the mist stone is bestowed directly and another where the stone independently finds a worthy individual. Aeru acknowledged that the latter applied in Cyan's case, noting the unexpected disappearance of the mist stone a year earlier. Additionally, Aeru expressed surprise at Cyan's ability to awaken Kieram, admitting his own failure in locating her. Kieram, appearing in her diminutive demonic form, silently displayed her displeasure at the notion of being handled by Cyan. Continuing, Aeru complimented Cyan's eyes, observing a wisdom beyond his years. He concluded that Cyan was an outsider from this timeline disconnected from his own. In Cyan's mind, thoughts churned as he pondered what Aeru had referred to, noting that Aeru's worlds were not part of his. He considered the possibility that Aeru might have been involved in his regression and voiced his suspicion, remarking internally that he had assumed Aeru had a hand in it. Aeru, however, dismissed the idea with an air of bluntness, explaining that if an omnipotent and omniscient god had been sought, then Cyan was in the wrong place. Aeru admitted he no longer possessed such powers, as his rights as a god had been stripped away long ago. Hearing Aeru's words, Cyan silently acknowledged their truth and admitted to himself that such expectations had indeed been misplaced. He reflected on the irony of the situation, expressing to Aeru in a contemplative manner that it was, in fact, convenient for him. Aeru's response to Cyan's observation carried a tone of excitement as he commented on the arrival of a perfect successor who had come willingly, reducing the burden of effort on Aeru's part. There was an unmistakable glee in Aeru's words as he mentioned not needing to lift a finger. Cyan, acknowledging this with a touch of sarcasm, remarked on Aeru's unchanged laziness, a sentiment that left Kieram, who was observing the interaction, both confused and uneasy. Shifting the subject, Aeru noted that Cyan had brought something troubling along with him. Aeru questioned whether the demonic sword had not been enough and hinted at Cyan's apparent intent to wield the power of the holy sword as well. Cyan, responding with a mischievous smirk, denied any current plans. With a devilish expression, he took out the broken piece of the holy sword's handle and speculated aloud that if the world were unaware of its existence, it might render the artifact useless. Aeru, observing Cyan's actions, appeared intrigued and commented on the malicious nature of Cyan's hobby, adding that he had no interest in interfering but would adhere to the rules. Aeru then approached Cyan, his presence growing oppressive as a dense aura emanated from him. With a cold and commanding tone, Aeru demanded that Cyan, as his successor and the inheritor of his power, reveal his intentions. Faced with Aeru's intimidating demeanor, Cyan slipped into deep thought. Memories of his brother surfaced, along with recollections of a similar question posed in his previous life. Back then, his answer had been a declaration to live for his brother, a response he now regarded as foolish. Reflecting on why such a shallow resolve had not been challenged, Cyan concluded that his past self had lacked deeper ambition. Aeru's voice echoed in his mind, warning of the peril inherent in blind faith. Resolving to be different, Cyan met Aeru's imposing question with clarity. He declared that his use of Aeru's power would not serve any grand cause or divine faith, but would instead be entirely self-serving. Surprised by this forthrightness, Aeru remarked on the weight of Cyan's decision and warned him to consider his answer carefully, as the wrong response could result in death. Remaining composed, Cyan reaffirmed his stance, expressing indifference to any consequences his actions might bring. He emphasized his intent to follow no one's orders and chart his own path. Aeru, sensing a hidden determination in Cyan's words, speculated about the existence of a greater plan, but received only a curt refusal from Cyan when asked for details. Accepting Cyan's decision, Aeru remarked that it was sufficient as long as Cyan purified his name. Their conversation was interrupted when Aeru swiftly appeared before Kieram. He declared that it was time to continue his conversation with his daughter, all while Kieram stood, sweating profusely in surprise. Kieram, flustered and angry, demanded an explanation, but Aeru continued with a light-hearted remark about her apparent obedience to Cyan. His words only served to intensify her discomfort, prompting her to lash out in protest. Cyan, observing the exchange, offered a dry remark on the nature of their wholesome father-daughter relationship, which only deepened Kieram's unease. As the tension escalated, Aeru's mouth attempted to kiss Kieram before magical circles appeared around her. The energy from these circles transformed Kieram back into her original form, leaving her bewildered. Cyan noted that his mana had not been consumed during this process and deduced that Aeru must have used his own power. Kieram, furious, seized Aeru by the collar and demanded an explanation. Aeru, unperturbed, calmly revealed that he had merely given her a portion of his life force, questioning whether she found this undesirable. He implied that such an action was necessary for her to serve Cyan's wishes. This implication drove Kieram into a fit of rage as she accused Aeru of harboring indecent intentions. Cyan, still observing, concluded that the relationship between Aeru and Kieram was undeniably that of a father and daughter. The following day, in the student dormitory, Cyan sat in a state of confusion. Brian, noticing his master's unusual demeanor, expressed concern and cautiously inquired about the situation. Cyan, maintaining a calm demeanor and a faint smile, simply replied that he did not know either and simply let them be. Brian, feeling uneasy, voiced his disagreement in a hushed tone. He whispered to Cyan, expressing his concern that the situation could not be left as it was. In front of them, Kieram and Serrika were exchanging glances filled with a peculiar form of affection, though their dynamic was far from ordinary. Kieram, visibly annoyed by Serrika's presence but still attempting to maintain a facade of civility, remarked with a strained smile that it was rather bold for an instructor to visit her students so early in the morning, hinting that others might gossip about their special relationship. Serrika, unfazed by the comment, retorted with a sharp tone, emphasizing that her intentions were purely professional and aimed at guiding her disciple along the correct path. She dismissed Kieram's insinuation, claiming the relationship was entirely normal. Kieram's expression hardened, her eyes sharp and threatening as she warned Serrika that a hall master ought to be more cautious. Serrika, not one to back down, snapped in return, questioning why her actions should matter to Kieram and telling her to mind her own business. The heated exchange resembled a battle of wits, with neither willing to concede. Kieram boldly declared that Cyan only needed her and that Serrika should keep her distance. Serrika, equally defiant, asserted that Cyan was her disciple and her responsibility. Standing amidst their escalating argument, Cyan wore a troubled expression, clearly unsure of how to resolve the conflict. He eventually stood up and announced his intention to go for a walk. Brian, alarmed by the prospect of being left alone with the two women, pleaded with Cyan to stay, but his protests were ignored. As the verbal duel continued, Brian's nervousness grew, beads of sweat forming as he feared becoming collateral damage in their clash. Outside the city, sunlight bathed the towering buildings, and the streets buzzed with activity. Merchants traded goods, and conversations filled the air. Cyan found a quiet, elevated spot where he sat alone, taking in the beauty of the bustling city below. For a moment, he felt a rare sense of peace and contentment. However, this tranquility was interrupted when a faint metallic scent drifted through the air. With his heightened senses, Cyan identified it as the smell of blood. His attention was drawn to an alley where a group of students surrounded a fallen peer. The victim had been kicked so hard that he crashed into a nearby barrel, coughing up blood as he clutched his bruised body. 3 other students loomed over him, their mocking laughter echoing through the narrow passage. One of them suggested something sinister, urging another to act. The student addressed as Barrett conjured an energy sphere and approached the fallen boy. With a cruel grin, he forced the injured student's mouth open and taunted him, claiming the sphere was a snack made especially for him and insisting that he eat it. As Barrett prepared to feed the energy sphere, the bullied student, terrified, closed his eyes tightly, bracing for the worst. Before the attempted assault could land, a commanding voice rang out, ordering Barrett to stop. It was Arin, who stepped forward with an air of authority. She sternly rebuked the aggressors, questioning how they could perform such a cruel act and whether they felt any shame in calling themselves nobles. Angered by the interruption, he revealed himself as Barrett Louismiel, the eldest son of Duke Louismiel of the Kieram kingdom. With an air of arrogance, he demanded to know who Arin was. Arin stood tall, crossing her arms confidently, and introduced herself as Arin Sevelus, princess of the Wusif Empire. Barrett, unimpressed, responded with a condescending smirk, noting that she was merely the fifth princess of the empire. Leaning closer, he mockingly expressed that it was an honor to meet her. Arin, uncomfortable with his demeanor, refused to shake his hand and instead demanded an explanation for the scene she had witnessed. Barrett, still smirking, dismissed her concerns, gesturing toward the injured student. He advanced menacingly, pulling the student forward and questioning whether he felt bullied. Intimidated, the student nervously denied the accusation, claiming that it was all just playful roughhousing. Arin, unconvinced, encouraged the student to speak honestly, pointing out his injuries as evidence. However, the student avoided her gaze and insisted that everything was fine, pleading for her to leave. Barrett, clearly pleased with this response, taunted Arin, accusing her of misunderstanding the situation. Undeterred, Arin declared her intent to take the injured student with her. Barrett, offended by her defiance, grabbed her arm tightly and threatened her, claiming she had failed to understand the situation. Puzzled, Arin demanded clarification, only for Barrett to growl that she had ignored his warning to leave. Before Barrett could finish his sneering insult, Cyan appeared suddenly, delivering a swift kick that sent Barrett sprawling to the ground. Arin's expression brightened at Cyan's timely arrival, relieved to be rescued from the tense confrontation. However, Cyan's attention was quickly drawn to a woman with pink hair standing nearby. He recognized her as Leximus. Observing her, Cyan was struck by a flood of memories from their shared past. He recalled an encounter on a rooftop where he and Leximus had engaged in fierce combat. Despite her being a woman, Leximus's swordsmanship had been formidable, her aggressive attacks forcing Cyan to fight with all his might. As these memories surfaced, Cyan contemplated whether the Leximus before him was truly the same person he had once known. Meanwhile, Leximus, witnessing the unfolding situation, grew increasingly concerned about the potential consequences of her involvement. Cyan defended and retreated, maintaining distance while assessing the situation. He remembered the continent's best swordsman, Leximus Klein. He knew she was originally from the Wusif Empire, but after graduating from the academy, she entered the Count Klein household in the Kieram kingdom and even changed her nationality. The battle between them continued, with blue and red sword slashes cutting through the air. Leximus executed a sword strike from below, slicing the ground vertically. Cyan attempted to evade by leaping high, but was surprised when Leximus immediately leapt toward him, swinging her sword in an arc from below. It seemed as if Leximus had struck Cyan, but to her surprise, it was only his cloak. Unexpectedly, Cyan appeared above her, catching Leximus off guard. Before she could react, Cyan dove down, stabbing his blade straight into her back, successfully pinning her to the ground. The dagger pierced through her from behind, scattering debris around as her sword slipped from her hand. She coughed up blood and lay motionless on the ground. Cyan revealed that he had been ordered by the Empire to kill her. His mission had been to assassinate her. However, after infiltrating the castle, he ended up in an official duel with her. There had been no particular reason for it. She was someone who had reached the peak of swordsmanship without mana. He didn't want to stealthily assassinate someone hailed as the continent's best swordsman. Returning to the present, Cyan still felt conflicted when facing the person he had once attempted to kill. Leximus, at this point, remained a naive girl, visibly intimidated by him. Other students rushed toward Barrett, calling out to him and expressing concern about the situation. Barrett, with an annoyed tone, rebuked the noisy attempting to stand up, grumbling about the number of nosy bastards around. He then confronted Cyan with a sharp look and asked if he was Cyan Vert, mentioning that he had heard about him. Barrett noted that Cyan had returned from the front lines and asked if he wanted to join their little game. Cyan considered Barrett's proposition to be a ridiculous game and think deep that the misuse of a mana marble could destroy mana within the body. He glanced at Barrett's group and said that he would join the game only if they forced a mana marble into someone's mouth. Immediately after, Cyan unleashed a shadowy version of the purple mana sphere, which appeared in his hand. Moments later, Cyan's mana transformed into a large ball that grew rapidly, engulfing the area above them, leaving Barrett horrified and speechless. Cyan's gaze then turned menacing as he questioned Barrett, demanding to know what he was doing. He continued by demanding that Barrett open his mouth to begin their game. The events following this moment were unknown, but the scene shifted to the Academy's infirmary. Leximus sat on the bed, her wounds bandaged, while Arin and Cyan were also present. Arin reassured Leximus that her external injuries were mostly healed, but that she needed to rest for her internal injuries to heal fully. Leximus expressed her gratitude for their help, thanking them and saying she didn't know how she could repay them. Arin excitedly, with her nose in the air, proudly remarked that they had only done what was necessary and that the bastards had run away when Cyan scared them. Cyan stood nearby, feeling puzzled by Arin's words. His expression turned slightly somber as he evaluated Leximus's injuries, noting fractures and a slight concussion. It was shocking that she had endured so much. He guessed that the continent's best swordsman would be different. Suddenly, Leximus hesitantly asked if Cyan knew her, feeling that he had been looking at her in a particular way. Cyan, puzzled by her question, responded coldly that he thought he knew her, but didn't. He apologized if his gaze had been unpleasant. Embarrassed, Leximus lowered her head and dismissed it, saying it was nothing. Still puzzled, Arin asked about Leximus's dorm and whether those bastards would come to retaliate or cause more trouble. Leximus, with a saddened expression, replied that she stayed in Commoner Hall. Upon hearing this, Arin wondered that Leximus stayed in Commoner Hall and noted that she was a peasant. Leximus admitted that she was. She had been enrolled thanks to instructor Velton, who promised her financial support for her education, but he had suddenly been fired. Cyan confirmed the situation, saying that no one was there to support her. Leximus agreed. Cyan continued, suggesting that she might have to leave the academy. Arin, feeling sorry for her, exclaimed that she was poor. Then Cyan suggested that Arin take her as her person to learn swordsmanship from her. At this point, Arin naively pointed at Leximus and asked Cyan with confusion what he was talking about, stating that Leximus was a boy. Cyan corrected her, explaining that she was in fact a girl. Arin, upon hearing this, stood frozen, unable to realize that Leximus was a woman. Leximus, now flustered, explained that she hadn't meant to deceive anyone. She mentioned that short hair and boys' clothes were simply more comfortable, which led many people to mistake her for a boy. Arin apologized, admitting that she hadn't even realized, and that even Cyan had known. In her heart, Arin told herself that she had failed as a woman. Leximus, equally flustered, quickly denied it, saying she should be the one apologizing. Arin then returned to the main topic, asking Leximus what she thought about her proposal. Arin elaborated that the idea was good and that she wouldn't be bullied by bad people if she came under Arin's protection. Leximus wondered why Arin would offer her help. Arin awkwardly laughed and explained that she didn't like being alone. However, the true reason, in Arin's mind, was that she couldn't just do nothing, as she was the princess. Leximus immediately thanked Arin, promising to become someone she could be proud of. She expressed her gratitude, thanking her profusely. Arin turned to Cyan, telling him that there was no need to thank her, as it was all Cyan's doing. But when she turned to look at him, Cyan was no longer there, having left without them noticing. Outside the medical building, Cyan stepped out, thinking to himself that he had done enough and that Princess Arin would take care of the rest. However, he also reflected on the reason Leximus had abandoned the Wusif Empire. She never would have lost her mana if it hadn't been for Barrett Louis Mill, if the continent's best swordsman, who had never lost her mana, making her someone difficult to defeat, even for him. Still, his current interest lay elsewhere. Cyan held a joyful mission order in his hand and thought about the task he had received from Hall Master Serrika that morning. It was his first purification mission as a mist,